So this will be, well, I want to talk about a few different things as usual, like along with this post, but I probably will like carry it over through the next couple. And as you can see, I've got a few different things pulled up. It's just that this is a perfect time, like, for certain things to be discussed because they overlap. And so I call this the 5 Ps of the Mauve zone, and I'm mainly referring to the middle pillar, as you'll see, but in what you could consider as like keys for each veil or whatever realm layer. And so I also want to read, I'm going to append this chapter on the alphabets from The Secrets of Ancient Geometry and Its Use by Brunes, but I'm also going to try to read from Outer Gateways about the Madhyamaka and Crowley, because basically this whole concept, like, it's probably going to be, I mean, it can't be considered like, you know, oh, this is how it is, and the whole thing is, I've, like, in studying all, not just Crowley's philosophy or whatever, which is limited and limiting, but the Madhyamaka itself, obviously the whole argument goes way back to, you know, like India. There's many different books about it. I have some that I've been trying to study, like Madhyamaka Schools in India by Della Santina. And the first one I actually got after hearing about it with this book is The Foundational Standpoint of Madhyamika Philosophy by Gadjin Nagao. And there's obviously like so much to this whole philosophy, numerous books, numerous, you know, philosophers, and they've all, like as with any philosophy, they've all got their nuances and disagreements and caveats or whatever, you know, additions, and so this certain ideas in this are going to be kind of like, you know, it's not like they have to be taken as this or that. And I think what it shows me ultimately is, again, this being post 62, it makes me think of the whole Friedrich formula of AL and LA, or all and nothing, essentially. And so I don't want to start with this, but it's weird because 62 is also the number of Yana, and then all these other things that it relates to. But Yana generally means vehicle, but it also means like a way. See, it says refers to marching, but it means like a sort of way in terms of like a path, or a, you know, there's Mahayana, Vajrayana, all these different schools, basically, schools of thought, the lineage schools, etc. This whole thing about, you know, the various schools of Buddhism is huge and very complicated, but at the same time, it's not that complicated. Like, as long as you just realize, like, there's the one Buddhism, and there's basically like some slowly, like, all this knowledge about Buddhist philosophy. I mean, not just because I've been reading it, but certain very important things are standing out that I had not anticipated, and I'll get to them, but I just want to sort of go through all this. So Yana refers also to chariot and the rest, the royal qualities. So just remember that a lot of these words, even though like they're simple and you generally have the understanding, they can also have like much deeper symbolic and contextual, you know, references and relations. And so yana, but yet you can rearrange that anyway. It can be anya, ajna, which is also the third eye, and then nausea, the serpent, and all these things are kind of related. Narayana, so to go or to move or reach, which is interesting. But really, it's like, it's funny because that division into 31 and 31 of 62 of the yana, the two ways, it's like this whole, there's a lot to this philosophy of Madhyamaka or Madhyamaka, middle way. Obviously, there's a lot to it alone and different sort of aspects. There's the Prasangika, and then also Svatantrika sects, or like schools or sides or whatever you want to call it. And Jamgon Control, who I've been studying, he apparently talks about it. I should pull what he says up about it. But so again, these are all weird words, but what's weird, even weirder thing is like, I didn't expect any of this Asian, I say Asian to cover up, again, the fact there's Tibetan, there's Sanskrit, there's Pali, there's all these different things, but the phonetic transliteration of a lot of these things happen to have phonetic, gematria things, using simply like the Hebrew, which apparently, again, going back, if you read or listen to that chapter on the various alphabets, they may actually originate from Eastern, like from the East. And either way, I mean, there's like definitely a yantra mandala sort of mathematics to it all anyway. So regardless of it, like I say, using the Hebrew alphabet, it seems that it's not, the Hebrew is, in the Phoenician is way older. But anyway, so besides promoting a general inclusiveness and non-sectarian attitude towards all the different Buddhist lineages in schools, Contral was known to promote a Shentong view of emptiness as the highest view. His view of Prasangika Madhyamaka is outlined in the following verse from the Treasury of Knowledge. Conceptual imputations are abandoned, all things are merely designations. Compounded phenomena are deceptive. Nirvana is not deceptive. The root of samsara is clinging to true existence, which generates the obscuration of the afflictive emotions. Since the first three yanas have the same way of seeing reality, there is only one path of seeing. All phenomena dissolve such that one's enlightenment only appears for the perception of others. According to Contral, the differences between Prasangika and Svatantrika Madhyamaka is that these schools differ in the way the ultimate view is generated in one's being. There is no difference in what they assert the nature to be. All the great scholars who are unbiased say that both of these schools are authentic Madhyamaka. Contral held that Shentong Madhyamaka was a valid form of Madhyamaka, which was also based on the Buddha nature teachings of the third turning in Nagarjuna and Nagarjuna's collection of praises. For him, this Shentong Madhyamaka is the view which holds that the ultimate truth, the primordial wisdom nature, the Dharmata, always exists in its own nature and never changes. So it is never empty of its own nature, and it is there all the time. However, he makes it clear that the Shentong view is free of the fault of saying that the ultimate is an entity. Furthermore, Contral states, the ultimate truth is the primordial wisdom of emptiness, free of elaborations. Primordial wisdom is there in its very nature, and is present within the impure mistaken consciousness. Even while consciousness is temporarily stained, it remains in the wisdom nature. The defilements are separable and can be abandoned because they are not the true nature. Therefore, the ultimate truth is also free of the two extremes of nihilism and eternalism. Since emptiness is truly established, then the extreme of nihilism is avoided. And since all phenomena and concepts of subject and object grasping do not truly exist, then the extreme of eternalism is avoided. Finally, on the difference between Rangtong and Shentong, Control writes in the Treasury of Knowledge, for both Rangtong and Shentong, the relative level is empty, and in meditation, all fabricated extremes have ceased. However, they differ in their terminology about whether dharmata is there or not there in post-meditation, and in the ultimate analysis whether primordial wisdom is truly established or not. Shentong says that if the ultimate truth had no established nature and was a mere absolute negation, then it would be a vacuous nothingness. Instead, the ultimate is non-dual, self-aware primordial wisdom. Shentong presents a profound view which joins the sutras and tantras. And that's weird because I keep seeing this come up, the sutras and tantras. And 666, again, what I was going to say about the weird thing about all this is Prasangika is also 666. And so, again, I haven't even started this blog yet, but this is what I wanted to sort of talk about, like, in relation to all this, because watch how it unfolds with this post. It's crazy. But, because I had actually talked about some of this stuff to a friend that I kind of bounce ideas off of. But Prasangika means subsidiary plot, or dramatic, or of a one of the two kinds of plot of a dramatic play according to the Natya Sastra. So, incidental, occasional, springing from the occasion. So again, the whole rationes seminales, or interdependent, co-arising concept in the whole Yogacara or Lankavatara philosophy, pertaining or suitable to the occasion or current subject, relevant, also seasonable, timely, or opportune. Incidental, occasional, proceeding from or belonging to any connection or relation, blah, 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 inherent or innate, inseparably connected with, episodical, so etc. Is what prasangika essentially means, but Tsongkhapa talked a lot about it, which I'm not going to go too far into that right now. But it's it's a whole deep thing. And then also Samkhya, which relates to the whole Svatantra. But not only that, Svatantra, which they call them Svatantrika or Svatantrics, is also Svatantrics with a shin, Svatantrics and Prasangika, which is funny because Prasangika is like singular, Svatantric and Svatantrics, independent. Purusa is one of the two fundamental eternal realities according to Samkhya. So the Purusa is not dependent on any cause for its existence. For this reason, Purusa is Svatantra, independent. Independent in activity, the subject or agent of an action, not depending upon. So, independent of attributes, Saguna, and represents an epithet of Shiva. Svatantrics. I don't know, I just found that, and I thought it was interesting, because I saw reference to that. Self-willed, independent of age. So, and it actually, this is what I keep seeing, is that it seems like the Svatantrics in what is it? I forgot the word, but it's like some school of philosophy. Svasta, it means like all or total. But it seems like some of these concepts are like an age-old representation of what we still see in numerous ways, where it's like people who are, I don't know, I don't want to put it into political terms, but it's like people who are unwilling to consider the whole, and it's almost like a sort of selfishness. And then there's this, which is more like inclusive. I don't know, it's just weird. Two yanas in a sense. Two ways of going about or looking at things, two philosophies. And it's funny because the whole Janus concept, I actually had it pulled up because there's this Ganesha being related to Janus in the last few things I've read, and yet there's this like dual Ganesha, and they're like hugging, Kanditen or Shoten, and all these other forms. And apparently he's like very powerful, and they're supposed to keep it, covered or enclosed. But oh, and I found this too. The Shadripus is also 666. Shadripus, yeah. So it would be like Shin Hey. And Shadripus are the 6 enemies, or the 6 enemies of the mind. Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. Which is just weird. Like I didn't make these things equal that. It's like these things stand out to me, so I'll like calculate it. Trying to think of what else. All these different things that. So yeah, the Yana, Ajna. What else am I thinking? Nausea. Oh yeah, Udana is 62, and it means like moving upward. Generally, obviously, there's a lot of other things. But so let's see, the Ajna. I'm just trying to think of what else I wanted to talk about. Anyway, this whole post, it's weird because what I think it represents in this weird process of what I was just talking about, the opposites are necessary for a sort of a progress, and so the opposites and the opposites of opposites, it's almost like whenever I get into the Madhyamaka chapter, this whole positive and negative, and then also the neither, like I think it's both and neither considered together is what essentially this whole tetragrammaton formula represents, which I get into here. But so anyway, just as a sort of like preface, I felt like I needed to go into all that. The confluence of the Sits working I've undertaken over this past year with the workings of many other adepts who have come to similar or related conclusions in containing noteworthy interrelations confirms my initial supposition that there are magical zeitgeists, so to speak, operating at specific times during which both initiates and non-initiates pick up on the same or similar spirits of the time and respond accordingly. This has been noted in the technological realm when inventors who had no knowledge of one another come to invent or discover the same or similar findings without any contact, known as multiple discovery. The same can be seen in religious and spiritual communities across the world which also had little to no contact, but nonetheless reached similar conclusions and created similar myths and legends. There are also what Kenneth Grant terms tangential tantrums, or magical side effects, such as ricochets from ceremonial magic rituals, sometimes as simple as backfirings and accidents, and sometimes resulting in conflagrations and wars. There have also been noted numerous UFO and paranormal events coinciding with or appearing in what seems to be response to certain magical workings of sufficient magnitude or affect. I have come to find certain keys that appear in the many accounts, systems, and occult sciences that can unlock these great mysteries, if but they are grasped through wisdom and understanding and applied. The key of the mark of the beast, said to be the X in the circle, and 666 as well, so they're actually connected, again, with the swastika, as I've shown, and I'll show with the elements, essentially, and I can't think of everything else, but the whole dark doorway of the beast is also implied. But anyway, and also the year, and I'll show this as I go, again, further in the next few posts. But the key of the mark of the beast conveys the symbolism of the neophyte grade, but contains within it the seed of the one true light of Kether, as Kether is in Malkuth, and Malkuth is in Kether, but after another manner. The saying, the X marks the spot, denoting hidden treasure or a secret, also comes to mind, being the cross of matter, wherein the spark of the self is situated between the planes of space-time, in the O, or cell or shell, of matter. Taken as letters, O and X, or ox, also relates to the first stage upon the Tarotic trail, as ox is the meaning of Aleph, the first Hebrew letter corresponding with Atu O, or 0, the fool who is about to fall into self-realization and initiation. In a sense, the abyss, which is also where he'll come to balance out in himself. But the number 4 and the symbol of the cross is universal in spiritual traditions, particularly the primal native cults who carved them in stone and painted them all over the world. The symbol also conjures the dragon lines, or ley lines, of dragon energies, which are said to be networks or webs of etheric or electromagnetic energy corresponding to key spots on the planet, especially at alignments with certain times. The 4 quarters signify the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, in 4 essential qualities of matter, earth, water, fire, and air. This signifies location and circumstance, in other words, set and setting, or mind and body, spirit and matter, in the whole phase state. Kenneth Grant calls it the symbol of Nodens and relates it to the thunderbolt or lightning flash of consciousness, creating the perception of subject and object, and thus manifestation. So that also relates, because I already just went over this with a friend, that the Degelug, like it's actually spelled Dgelug, the transliteration of the Tibetan Gelug sect. The Degelugs is 111, which is funny because all the different things relating to that, like basically that field, the lightning bolt, the Kabbalah itself, the original, even though they're not necessarily the original Tibetan Buddhists at all, like technically the Bone tradition is, but the Gelug or Geludspa sect still comes to mind, just with that whole lineage and the purity of the 111. And so this, I don't know, it just comes up. It is also a connected or solidified swastika, which corresponding not with solid matter, but the movement of air, would here symbolize the Ahrimanic tendency toward rigidity and stiffness of material form. As the key of the Lord of the Gates of Matter, it is also known as the Mark of the Beast, for it unlocks the abyss and unbinds the cosmic egg by loosing the 7 seals of the cube of space. And so again, these 7 seals, in a way, may correspond with the 7 circles, or the sevens, relating to the whole connection between 666 and 777, 777 being the Hashabath, also Samhain, which is Halloween, literally Samhain, or Samhain spelled out, which technically is Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain. I want to quote from Chapter 4, Understand the Name of Tetragrammaton, The Secret to Evoking Angelic Powers and the Key to the Apocalypse, now published as The Power of the Word by Donald Tyson. Although lengthy, Tyson details how the three dimensions of the tetrahedron are precipitated out of the tetragrammaton, which is essentially a binary formula used in many divination systems, and that it can be rendered to produce a model for four-dimensional space-time. The mark of the beast is the unifying link between the three-directional planes. The OOO, or the AN, the three ring-pass knots. See The Cosmic Doctrine by Dion Fortune, which is where she also uses that in her whole quasi-theosophical sort of cosmogony or whatever, and the subsequent enfolding of light into conscious reflection or refraction. So he says, the letters of Tetragrammaton designate the four essential principles that form the foundation of the universe and constitute the mechanism of both creation and destruction. These principles are the bare backbone of the world. Any symbols might be used to signify them, shapes, numbers, or letters of other alphabets than Hebrew. Pythagoras used simple dots in his Tetractys. In attempting to understand the essence of the cosmos, we are eventually faced with four boxes into which we must put everything that is manifest. Each box is different, yet its difference is not absolute, but dependent upon its relationship with other boxes. Somehow we reduce the infinite number of things into four categories. See the comments of P.D. Uspensky in Appendix B. At first thought, it would be natural to assume that the process of bringing ideas forth and sustaining them in manifestation would be supported by four completely different factors. This would need to be symbolically represented by a name composed of four different letters. However, creation is not a closed circle, but a double helix, represented in two dimensions by the standing wave. See illustration. In the illustration, I and V, or Yod and Vav, are a polarity of forces and exchange their charges or potentials as they pass through He, which acts very much as a kind of switch. The result is a continuous flowing forth into being with no obvious sign that this polarity switching is taking place. A useful physical model of this archetypal process is the electric motor. The axis of a motor turns smoothly in one direction, even though the polarity of the electromagnets around that axis is being very rapidly switched back and forth from positive to negative. The standing wave of Tetragrammaton. The creation-destruction double helix of the name resembles closely the serpent staff of Hermes. The mystical staff with its two united and intertwined snakes coiling about it has from ancient times represented life, the bringing forth of being from nothingness. It used to be believed that snakes entwined in this intimate manner were mating. Actually, they were fighting. The staff of Hermes is a two-dimensional physical representation of transcendental intellectual action that flows forth unceasingly from the mind of the Creator. It would be closer to the fundamental reality if the motor were made in three dimensions. Then it would consist of two helical paths twining up an invisible central axis, and in fact would look very much like the molecular models of DNA. It is no coincidence that the building blocks or bases of DNA, adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, are 4 in number. This correspondence is inevitable because the basic patterns of being replicate themselves endlessly on all levels of manifestation, both mental and physical. The Hermetic maxim of the Emerald Tablet testifies to this replication. What is below is like that which is above, and what is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. In the same way that the molecular pattern of a crystal is revealed by its gross shape, so is the mental pattern of the creating mind of the universe exhibited in the structure of the genetic coding of life. In this three-dimensional staff of Hermes, no point on either helix is closer to the ideal axis, which the path of each helix defines, then any of the limitless number of other points, and at no point do the two balanced helices touch. Like the side rails of the DNA ladder, they remain always at the same separation. Any single point on either helix is identical, considered by itself, to any other point. Differentiation occurs through the relationship of one point to another, considered from a specific and arbitrary external point of view. Shift the point of view and these essential qualities change. An I can become an H, and an H can become a V. For example, if the illustration of the double helix of the name were rotated around on its axis 90 degrees, the points designated H would seem to touch and become alternatively I and V, and the I and V would separate and become H. It is easy to misinterpret occult symbols by failing to recognize that the way they appear on the page were carved true form but only a flat rendering of a three-dimensional relationship. Just as a blueprint of a ship will not convey all the information it is capable of conveying to the shipbuilder unless the shipbuilder realizes that it is a flat image of a three-dimensional object, so ancient symbols such as the Staff of Hermes cannot be understood unless we recognize that they are only images of mental models that possess depth as well as height and breadth. An excellent example of this error is the spiral. This fundamental occult symbol cannot be wholly grasped in 2 dimensions. A spiral is really the flat image of a helix, a line winding in a regular way around the side of an infinitely long, invisible cylinder. As we look at the spiral on the flat page, we are regarding the cylinder through the open end, and naturally its perspective lines converge at the center. The infinitely distant end of the cylinder, when we look at the straight railroad bed and seem to see the gleaming steel rails come together and meet on the horizon. When we see a photograph of a railroad track from this one-point perspective, we understand it because it represents the three-dimensional model of an ideal form, not some common and familiar object. Nevertheless, the ancient shaman who carved it into the rock intended that it be considered in 3 dimensions. So did Greek philosophers who represented the occult symbol of the Hermes staff intend that this mystery be interpreted in 3 dimensions. And when we make a model or image representing IHVH, or Yadhe-Vavhe, we must make it with length, breadth, and height if it is to possess a useful meaning. Needless to say, any mystical 3-dimensional symbol is only a jumping-off place for grasping an awareness of a higher truth that transcends the physical limitations of space. So again, 3-dimensional is 333, and yet caduceus is 333. So it's almost like it's hinting at that. It is necessary first to recognize the fullness of flat symbols and hold them unfolded in the mind, and then attempt a further unfolding into a higher dimension which transcends our inner visual sense. Since we are incapable of holding a 4-dimensional or higher image in the mind, we must seek an intuitive perception of the mentally examined symbol, a wordless and pictureless apprehension of its fundamental identity. Only in this manner can the true ineffable name be approached. Words and mental images are useful signposts along the way, but if we cling to them, we quickly become barriers to a higher awareness of Tetragrammaton. Besides the staff of Hermes, which is the preeminent symbol for understanding the name, intuitive awareness may be approached through the symbol of the cross. Each arm of the cross is assigned one of the letters. The vertical arm receives the masculine Yod and Vav, while the horizontal arm is given the feminine first and second He. It should come as no surprise, after what has just been revealed, that the cross must also be considered in 3 dimensions before it makes any useful sense esoterically. Meaning can be derived from the flat cross on the page, but a higher meaning is possible from the expanded 3-dimensional cross. The expanded cross is the geometrical figure known as the tetrahedron. The tetrahedron is the simplest regular solid body. It has 4 planes, each of which is divided by an equilateral triangle, and 4 points where these planes intersect. A letter of IHVH or Yod-He-Vav-He is assigned to each point. If we examine the tetrahedron mentally, or actually construct a skeletal model out of toothpicks or wire, it is readily seen that when considered perpendicularly to any of its edges, it appears to form a cross of equal arms surrounded by a square. If we look at the two places of the tetrahedron that intersect and define the axis Yod-Vav, we see that each plane has the family of letters Yod-He-Vav at its 3 points. The second or final He is not on the same plane, but is linked to each of the former letters by a line segment. Thus, there is something special or distinctive about the final He that transcends the plane of the other 3 letters. The distinction is not inherent in the point of the second He itself, but derives from its position relative to the other 3 points. It is equally possible to mentally isolate the planes that intersect on the He-He axis. Then we get the family Yod-He-He with Vav on a higher level, or the family Vav-He-He with Yod on a higher level. What does this tell us? That Yod and Vav are capable of inverting roles, depending on their circumstances, even though they are not outwardly identical, as are the 2 feminine He's. The magician Aleister Crowley had something to say on this very matter. In addition to the Tetragrammaton, he used the 4 royal cards of the tarot to illustrate his views. The relations between these 4 elements of the names are extraordinarily complex. Quite beyond the limits of any ordinary treatise to discuss, they change with every application of thought to their meaning. For instance, no sooner has the princess, or second He, made her appearance than the prince, Vav, wins her in marriage, and she is set upon the throne of her mother, first He. She thus awakens the eld of the original old king, who thereupon becomes a young knight, Yod, and so renews the cycle. The princess is not only the perfect maiden, but owing to the death of the prince, the forsaken and lamenting widow. All this occurs in the legends characteristic of the Aeon of Osiris. It is hardly possible definitely to disentangle these complications, but for the student it is sufficient if he will be content to work with one legend at a time. The Book of Thoth, page 150 through 151. The square brackets in the above are mine. Crowley viewed the dynamic of the name as a series of family trines in which the father and the mother, Yod and first He, alternatively generate the son and daughter, Vav and second He. The generative unit is complete in the trinity, but this trinity endlessly alternates its polarity, male-female, male giving way to male-female-female, and vice versa. The Vav elevates his twin sister, the second He, to the throne of the now barren mother, the final He, whom she replaces. Her mature beauty arouses the creative lust of the Vav, who ascends to the throne of his father, the Yod. By this ascent he is transformed, and his old identity dies or passes from existence. The renewed and fertile male-female pair in turn produces the next generation. It is interesting to note that in ancient Egypt it was the custom for the young prince to replace the dying king, his father on the throne, and marry his own sister, the princess, who became queen and took over the post of her mother. In this way, the king was forever renewed in his own blood and might be said symbolically to be deathless. This Egyptian custom is an imitation on the human level of the creative process of Tetragrammaton. On this question, see also the remarks of Crowley in Appendix B. In order to understand the essential differences between the letters of the name, it is necessary to reduce them to binary symbolism. This is the same symbolic system of logic that runs the modern computer. The binary system is composed of only 2 characters, which are usually represented by the digits 0 and 1. They might just as accurately be represented by on and off, or yes and no, or indeed any set of opposites. By arranging these 2 symbols in multiple patterns, it is possible to express not only any numerical calculation, but also any idea conveyed by alphabetical text. Even romantic poetry and classical music can be translated into binary symbols. In fact, binary is the basis of the modern digital recording method used on compact discs. The binary and computer coding that make up the yes-no switches are no abstractions, but represent the basic duality of the natural world. They are related to the tetragrammaton in this way. 1, 1 being yod, 0, 0 being hey, 1, 0 being vav, and 0, 1 being hey. Although binary language seems like a modern innovation, it has been used to convey subtle philosophical concepts for many centuries. The quintessential binary symbol is the yin-yang of ancient China. This is nothing more than a circle representing totality or wholeness, half of which is white and the other half black. In the black half is a white dot, in the white half a black dot, to signify that these opposites are relative rather than absolute, that black under other circumstances appears white, and white under other conditions looks black. The division between the sides is S-shaped to give the appearance of turning movement in the circle, indicating that this primal duality is not static but in constant flux. The binary pair of opposites is represented in Oriental philosophy by the more basic symbolism of a solid line and a broken line. The solid line is masculine and the broken line feminine. These basic signs can be used to represent all opposite pairs, such as hot, cold, up and down, dark and light, long and short, good and evil, and so on. In themselves, the simple signs are of limited usefulness, but the number of different things can be represented by them increases exponentially as they are combined. Simply by placing the two signs one over the other, we arrive at the four possible combinations that graphically reveal the essential distinction between the four letters of tetragrammaton. Solid, solid, broken, broken, solid, broken, and broken, solid. These four symbols are the second of the 6 stages of what is called Xiao-Yung sequence, which graphically illustrates how the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching are evolved from a solid and broken line. See Wilhelm in the Book of Changes or the I Ching. It will be observed that the binary symbol of I, who is Abba, the primal masculine principle, and that of the first He, who is Ima, the primal feminine principle, are completely distinct. When they combine sexually, half of their binary coding is passed into each of their offspring, just as a child receives half of its genetic code in the sperm of its father and the other half in the egg of its mother. The binary symbols for V and the second H both contain a solid and a broken line, the solid line from the father and the broken line from the mother. This is the reason Crowley describes the second He as the twin sister of Vav. They are made up of the same parts, but in an inverted order. In the case of V, the masculine solid line is dominant, whereas in the second He, it is in the broken feminine line that determines gender. When in turn the Vav and the second He combine to generate offspring, the seed of Vav is purely masculine, composed only of the solid line in the binary code, and the egg of the second He is purely feminine, composed of only of the broken line. In this sense, when brother and sister mature and come together to reproduce new life, they assume the pure gender identities of their parents. As immature children, they are both male and female in one, but as sexually mature adults, they are of a single gender. It may be more useful to think that the Yod and the first He not as complete male and female human figures, but as sperm and egg. With this in mind, it is easier to grasp how the Vav can be distinct from the Yod and yet at the same time embody the Yod within himself, and how the second He can be both the product of the first He and also hold the first He latent within herself. This binary system was not entirely unfamiliar to the Western world in ancient times. It appears in the symbols of geomantic divination, which was known to the Romans and early Europeans. In the geomantic figures, 2 dots stand for the feminine and 1 dot for the opposite masculine. Using this system, the letters of Tetragrammaton would be represented in the following manner. ... double dot, single dot, double dot, and double dot, single dot. Each geomantic symbol is composed of one of these letter sets in combination with itself or with one of the other three sets. There are thus 16 distinct geomantic figures. Expressed in the form of solid and broken lines rather than dots, these same 16 figures form the fourth stage of the Shaoyong sequence. Each, esoterically speaking, is based upon the letters of Tetragrammaton. For example, the geomantic figure known as the Via, or the Way, is composed of Yod plus Yod. This is an inherently active and willful symbol because it is based upon two fiery Yods. Its traditional meaning reflects this forcefulness. Via means street or road, and by extension, travel or a journey. It is neither a good nor an evil figure, since travel can bring either good or evil. Where the traditional meaning of the geomantic figures are in disagreement with their symbolic meanings, as based upon the letters of Tetragrammaton, not merely as a blueprint of the world, but as the basic fabric of reality, it is this fundamental nature of the name that gives it so much power in modern ritual magic. This unfolding of space-time from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to infinity creates the toroidal field matrix of which the symbol of Malkuth is but a key to understanding. Thus, the key of it all, of infinity, or Ein Sof, the limitless, is obtained when one can transcend the first fractal step and get beyond the projection of material substance and enter through the first gateway of which the beast in its legion of masks is guardian. The seeds of the flower and of the tree of life are the same as the seed of the serpent, and its germination generates the universe from the geometry expanding from the awakened light within the O. By shifting the perspective focus of the 2D form of the Tetragrammaton cross to the 3D Tetragrammaton tetrahedron, a prism is generated parallel to the generation of a fourth dimension, added in the activational unfolding of time arising out of the expansion of space. Hence the third sphere of the supernal triad ruling over time and space, where at the abyss of Thoth the prism explodes into formation. Thoth being the abyss or divide between manifestation and the unmanifest is the gap between the electromagnetic spectrum, and Kabbalistically the gap, or gulf, between Aleph and Tau, the first and the last. That which is before Aleph and after Tau, or that which lies beyond the pylons, is related to the idea of the lost word, or the unspeakable secret name of God, which to see, speak, or even know would confer theosis. As such, it is the cup, because guff and cup, a form of the guff, or grail, in which the life essence or soul is contained, related in psychology with the brain, mind, and body, as well as the waters are symbolic of the thoughts, emotions, and feelings. The trans-dimensional nature of Thoth is what gives the tree of life life, by making the Ruach not flat, as shown on a flat depiction, but also multidimensional. This is the process hinted at in the section called The Sign of Protection in the Ninth Arch, by Kenneth Grant, where the fifth point of the pentagram pierces into another dimension outside of the elemental cross, much in the same way the Tetragrammaton cross unfolds multidimensionally. Tyson says not to think of esoteric symbols as they appear, but to try and unfold them in the mind. And the Tree of Life is one in which real work within and upon it necessarily relies upon a visionary unfolding in the mind as one slowly understands its mechanics. The ability to think outside the box of the physical and more freely within the mental realm is a quality particular to Yesod, the ninth sphere of the Tree of Life, representing the foundation upon which the stage of the play of life, Malkuth, rests, the theatrum. And so again, that sits just came into my mind as being that sort of like inescapable samsara loop. That's why these things like laughably happen to, I mean, center on that number. It's not like they don't equal, everything else. Like, it's not like I'm saying everything equals everything. I'm just saying all these different things fill in all those gaps, and yet things just happen to fall into this sort of contextual relative place. And so it seems like contradictory in that things would do that, because then it's like, okay, well, you must be making it do that. Well, no, it's the fact that it's a weird prasangika sort of situation, it seems like, with the whole nothing has independent existence concept. Like, there's no way that these things, I don't know, that's the only explanation is, and there's this guy, Jan Westerhoff, he wrote this thing, I needed to pull it up actually, about this whole concept, actually. Let me pull it up real quick. Some remarks on a problem in Madhyamaka philosophy of language. This paper attempts to dissolve an apparent difficulty arising in the philosophy of language as discussed in the Indian Buddhist Madhyamaka school. On the one hand, Madhyamaka seems to be claiming that every entity is fundamentally linguistic in nature. On the other hand, it also asserts that language does not exist. I argue that the difficulty is to be dissolved by distinguishing two different senses of language appealed to by the Madhyamikas. They argue that one specific understanding of language is deficient, and that therefore language thus understood does not exist, but this is not the same sense of language according to which everything is linguistic in nature. The apparent contradiction is thereby resolved. So, I mean, it goes way more into that whole thing, but that's essentially what I've been contemplating myself, is like, it's arbitrary, yeah, like you wouldn't expect these things to have any sort of numerical relevance, but at least for at the very least, they do for, like, again, mnemonics, like as memory devices. But you wouldn't expect that, like, again, there's actually a term for it, it's called pratisamkhya, or pratisamkhya nirodha, I think. And it's basically, like, in a sense, knowing based on, it's like filling in the gaps of what you don't know based on what you do know, in a sense. And so it kind of goes with the whole concept of just using gematria as an example of, you take something known, some like known formula, and you have automatically various other sort of like cross references, as long as you have a datum from which to draw from, or a database from which to compare it with. But generally, if you're well versed in some of this stuff, things will just like come up spontaneously. And so that's the whole crazy thing, is looking at the actual where things fall into place. A lot seems to be there, and it's like, wow, you can actually learn from it. So again, with the whole rationes seminales, or the seed principles, it means that essentially, like, I'm not going to say you can divine or use it as a divination system necessarily, but there is a digital nature to things, and so there is a projective quality to things, like, and therefore deductive quality. But as well, like, it goes back to the whole question of consciousness, though, of like, you can't really fine-tune devices to perfectly hone in on the true nature of consciousness fully, because it's like somewhat variable, and as soon as you try to interfere with those variables, the more variable they get. So again, this whole thing about philosophy, or the philosophy of Madhyamaka and Samkhya and these different schools, is it's very slippery, and yet that's the nature of the mind, is like, it wants to grasp, and yet we've tried grasping at the mind and like you can't really find it. It's because it's the clear light. And this clear light is what seems to... The whole sit thing I was just going to try to say is like you want to nail it down. And in a sense, it's already nailed down. And I don't know, that the whole concept of the Furba, or the Vajrakila, the Vajrakilaya, or the Kila, it's all about nailing things down. And this whole thing about samsara comes to mind because, again, Bina and Tifereth, and then the path of Zain, even though it's the sword, I think of the Furba, or the Kila, because it's that connection between, it's that time, like, they say the Furba is really a miniature of the whole mandala. And in a sense, that's what I think of as relating to the sword path connecting Tifereth to Bina. It's sort of like your heart and time, like Chronos, and that whole connection, in a sense. It probably doesn't make any sense, but that's what I'm thinking. Taken symbolically, 9 has long been associated with the serpent and the Ouroboros, or snake eating its own tail, which relates to the fact that all multiples of 9 always reduce or return to 9. The serpent has always symbolized that which was forbidden, secret, or hidden, and so 9, being also the number symbol, relates to the chambers of the number symbol, relates to the hidden or forbidden knowledge of the Kabbalah of 9 chambers, each cell of the numbered grid being a chamber. When a slightly larger number grid pattern is placed over another, the image of the matrix web is noticeable, the underlying foundation of matter, relating again to the dragon lines, which only those who can see beyond the physical or visible spectrum can recognize effectively. To see beyond the 9 chambers is to reach the secret word of God, which the Freemasons hid underground beneath 9 arches in the Royal Arch legend, again denoting the self-return of the Ouroboros, or dragon, or phoenix, the union of the true self, or soul, with the great architect of the universal temple. Thus, the highest chamber, 999, is that of the serpent link, with Ka final. Between the two, the serpent acting as unifier and divider and concealing the supreme knowledge, which was said to convey to mankind the knowledge of God, which, being made in the image of God, should be his rightful inheritance, and also, therefore, not too far away. The number 9 in its relation to toroidal hyperdimensional physics, or vortex-based mathematics, has been covered by many mathematicians and engineers, such as Marco Rodin, Dan Winter, Nikola Tesla, and others. Tesla he's been alleged, but I don't know how true it is, but said that the numbers 3, 6, and 9 are significant, the 3 main chambers of the Kabbalah of 9 chambers. If only you knew the magnificence of 3, 6, and 9, then you would have a key to the universe. Again, allegedly. But either way, I think that it's insightful, and I think it's hinting at what people generally sense about 3, 6, and 9 being the sort of hinging numbers of the spectrum. 333 is Aik Bakur and refers to the chambers, or the number chambers themselves. 666 is the value of the Kabbalah of 9 chambers itself, spelled out, Hebrew applied to English. And 999 is many things, being the 9th chamber, veiling the higher power beyond, but expressed through number. Not only are 3, 6, and 9 symbolic of 3 major Masonic degrees, the triangle, hexagram, and 9-pointed star of the 33rd degree, but 369 is the number of Mathetai, or Mathatai, Greek for learned or instructed ones, those who had the Sophia, also 369 in Greek, with the wisdom. 369 is the number of the matrix, as well as spirit, or ghost, which it activates. 369 is a universal key number, just as Tesla said, as are the numbers 3, 6, and 9, which form the triangles, 999, at the folds or angles of numerical emanation. And so again, the triangles, the circle, and the grid essentially are the basis of the yantra, or the occult geometry system, from the geometry of the temples, from Hans Brunes' The Secrets of Ancient Geometry. And so there's a lot to that whole thing. But when the circle of 360 is divided by 7, the only number it won't be divided evenly by, the result is 51.428571. Any number that is not a multiple of 7 when divided by 7 will have a remainder of some metathesis of 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, and 8, which exclude 3, 6, and 9. 3, 6, and 9 are the hinges or angles which help in the spiral unfolding, and the shapes of the symbols themselves indicate this, 3 being the root of the spiral or coil, if you looked at the actual number symbol itself as well, 6 being the inward current of force from the crown, 9 being the outward current of force, figured in the soul symbol as Kether being the point, 6 being gravity or will, 9 being the radiating force and emanating the physical exterior of the circle. Or possibly vice versa, I guess, because they are like yin and yang. The other factors or vectors are balancers and containers of this force, which again is pure holographic spirit, or ruach, emanated from the supernal triad. The 9 chambers conceal the ineffable word, which is that of the life force and breath, or ruach, itself, which as a grain of sand, or seed, 0, contains within itself its will unmanifest. Seeing the numbers as energy and the inner essence of outer forms confers the siddhi known as the Eye of the Dragon, or Drakoncha, 739, equivalent to the sum of the infernal or inverted eye in the triangle formed from Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth, the inverted eye being symbolic of the inward eye, or Anya, known as the wisdom eye. 739 is also the value of the mirror, symbolic again of reflection and the quality and wisdom of the dragon, and Temet Nose, know thyself. The reflective quality of 9 in the mind itself is the infinite nature of the Ein Sof Or, the limitless light of fractal manifestation. Hence the 999 essentially equating with the 000, or the limitless light. 666, the number of the beast and man. 666, explicitly given in Revelation, and said to be calculated with wisdom and understanding, is the central of the 5 keys of the Mauve zone, which the aligning with and obtaining of conveys the siddhi of self-awakening and self-willed manifestation, known in the Masonic tradition as the degree of Master Mason. Solomon was said to have received 666 talents of gold each year, symbolic of the accumulation of magical energy through the bioalchemical processes effected through certain ritual practices and ceremonial procedures performed at specific times and dates throughout the year, a form of which has been enacted throughout this 111th year of the Aeon of Horus, interweaving with 666, the number of Therion, the beast, the great beast, as well in Greek, is the inversion, as per typical of the nature of the beast, Therion with none final, 999. Thus, 666 and 999 come together as the double-headed beast pointing to the sun and moon as Baphomet, Salve et Coagula. Being the lost key of Revelation, 666 is the missing link in the evolution hypothesis, and its full understanding is capable of conveying the transcendental wisdom of the gods, which is incapable of fitting within a merely three-dimensional conceptual framework of a limited linear perception. At best, this wisdom can be pointed to in a multitude of ways, but the true meaning and full extent thereof is truly unspeakable, except in parables, symbolic associations, and correspondences, which include literature in all forms, language, and mathematics. Although obviously it looks rather flat, it has to be sort of projected from, multi-dimensionally. multidirectionally. If there were no such thing as synchronicity, as the ignorant would say, then surely not only would these words have no synchronized meaning with your known vocabulary, and surely no mathematical solutions whatsoever would synchronize with the objects, forces, or qualities they measure, and physical science itself would be nothing but nonsense. Obviously, this is not the case. Mathematics is the science of synchronicity, and science itself tends to bridge the gap of the synchronicity between mind and the perception of reality. The word science comes from the Latin root scientia, knowledge, a knowing, or to know, obviously related to doth, but again, there's the veil of the shadow or the reflection, implying a difference between the knower and that which is known. A deeper root of scientia comes from sciere or scire, to know. Originally to separate one thing from another, to distinguish, related to skinder, to cut, divide, from root sky, which then, to cut or split. This is cognate with the Greek schizein, to split, rend, or cleave, which is the root of the word schizophrenia, the schizein, splitting or cleaving of the phren, or mind. Modern industrial science has largely been left to squander much of its assets and resources in being too schizophrenic or compartmentally minded in its approach to many different subjects which have largely been kept separate, for a good reason to an extent, but to too great of an extent to where it has restricted a great amount of progress in many ways, socially, archaeologically, and ecologically, for the benefit of extended release marketing and academic and technocratic monopolism. Science also means to investigate and test the natural environment, and too soon are supposed scientists ready to refuse to even investigate many subjects because of this compartmentalized and narrow-angled approach. 666 is the key to the material plane and automatic or artificial intelligence, and the synchronicities thus far noted in this publication, as well as many that can be extrapolated and which have yet to be deciphered, show that the key is actually a link between the material and noumenal or mental and mystical, being that of the Word made flesh, as number of the Son and man, wherein the Word or will becomes fleshed, or earthed, manifest. What does it mean? This is the gnosis. There is a secret rendering for the Hebrew word for the name, Hashem, usually referring to Tetragrammaton. The original Hebrew rendering is He, Aleph, Shin, Mem, but if the Shin is replaced with a Samek and the Mem is given its final or end value, the name, Hashem, is revealed as 666, the value of the name of the man mentioned in Revelation 13:18. 666 is also Ha-Shafir Aish, or Ha-Sapir, or Ha-Safir Aish, the Book of Man, which 666 effectively is, being the human anthropos, humanity, etc. The body of man has been sometimes called the Book of Blood, and the human body, Yad-He-Vav-He, Yad-He-Vav-He form, IHVH form, equals 666, showing yet again how 666 is the number of man in the image of God, also the IHVH shape of man number. This is not to imply a creationist sentiment, merely that there is yet another relevant correspondence between allegory and actuality, and the ability to reason and recognize this shows some level of reciprocality and significance in the knowing between the knower and the thing known. Not only does the name of the creative power of God form the image of man, but it corresponds to the secret knowledge of man, which is contained in the book and body of man. Just as the temples are built according to sacred geometry, so is the body of man in a number of ways, one notable one being the fact that there are 206 bones in the adult human skeleton, and the bones equals 206. The skeleton or frame of man being Ha-Madhyamaka-karika, the great house or temple of God. And there is no God but man, Libra as Aleister Crowley. Neither shall they say, see here, or see there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Luke 17:21. A curious connection has come up in regards to the work I've been doing and the work of another occult researcher and writer who has made certain discoveries recently that I think are highly important in relation to the 666 mystery I've been trying to unravel. The book Baphomet, the Temple Mystery Unveiled by Tracy Twyman came up the other day in my research, and although it has yet to be published, Tracy has been giving very detailed and fascinating updates about her progress for quite a while, it appears, having been working on the book since 2007. While there are a multitude of various points she makes with the many angles of the subject of Baphomet, some of the most intriguing to me are those dealing with the symbolism in certain reliefs found and written about in the 19th century by an Orientalist researcher, Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall, whose main reference work in this respect is Mysterium Baphometis Revelatum, featured in Fundgruben de Orientis 6 from 1818, which is available online but untranslated from combined languages of Latin, Greek, German, and Arabic, a task she apparently hired an anonymous translator for. I attempted to translate some of it myself and found it does indeed mention some of the secrets of these cults and the charge of the affiliation between them and the Knights Templar and Freemasonry, and while that may or may not be the case, my interest is more in regards to the roots of Baphomet and its prototypes and its eventual degeneration into the modern idea of Satan and Satan worship. Baphomet was first said to possibly mean baptism of wisdom by Freemason and Illuminist Christoph Friedrich Nicolai in Versuch über die Beschuldigungen, welche dem Tempel Herrenorden gemacht wurden, und über dessen Geheimnis. Formed from the Greek words Baphometus or Baphimetos to mean Taufe der Weisheit or baptism of wisdom. It has also been said that Baphomet signifies Baphimeteos, baptism of Metis, baptism of fire, or the Gnostic baptism, an enlightening of the mind, which, however, was interpreted by Ophites in an obscene sense as fleshly union. Surely this fiery baptism of enlightenment was misunderstood and used for ritual sacrifice purposes at some point, and such sacrifices have been occurring from prehistoric times to today. But what is really meant here is the baptism of wisdom or fire, signified by the fiery nature of self-awakening and attainment to the level of Tifereth, the sun, which is expressed in the positive aspects of Baphomet, wherein the forces of the sun and the moon, 666 and 999, are balanced in a just measure. Note also that meet, or mete, means measure and justice. So the Baphomete, or Baphomet, could also be the baptism of justice, which would be a metaphor for the incarnational life experience wherein the soul is baptized in its apportioned allotment. Mete in the form of Baphomet can be 59, the number of image, and Tan, the dragon. In this sense, the wisdom of Mete connects with the mathematics of Maon. Baphomet is Baphomet or Bahamut, Behemoth, the dragon, Tan. 59 is one more than the Knights Templar number of reverence, which is 58, and this number is significant since it is that of Ha-Abin, the stone of the mysteries, as well as relating also to Kephis, 729, 9 cubed, another form of Baphomet, as Baphometer, and the Tetractys of the inverted Tetragrammaton, said to be the true name of Satan. 58 is the stone, Ha-Abin, which is 301, or Ash, fire, less than 359, Satan, or Shaitan. Thus, 359 is Ha-Abin Ash, the fire stone, or Tuawi, revered as Lucifer, Satan, Baphomet, the double one, but merely a form of the double current mentioned by Albert Pike in the quote referenced in the previous post, Lost Key of Revelation, the electromagnetic force whose dual nature is like that of love and wrath. 359 thus meets, or measures, allots, forces from beyond the pylons of our boundaries. Meet also means boundary, pylon, or limit of the circle, hence the importance of the circle in sealing and containing magical 666 or 666 electric energy, i.e. solar electric energy. Shaitan or Satan thus denotes the stranger, other, or alien from outside the circle of the known, the hidden or unknown god, combining Shet or the fire snake, Shin and Teth, Set, and Tan, the dragon, the fiery dragon or the scarlet dragon. The symbolic glyph usually attributed to the zone of Doth on the Tree of Life is that known as the Herschel H, being the symbol of Uranus and named after its discoverer William Herschel. The symbol is strikingly similar to that of the double-edged key, the key being a major symbol relating to Doth as the knowledge, particularly hidden or secret knowledge, of the Kabbalah. H is also the letter relating to the future as the final He of Tetragrammaton, and reflected in the symbols for the Higgs boson, God particle, and the transhuman H+ movement. H is also a symbol of the linking of the two pillars, and thus the fusion of the discontinuity of the 11 and gaining another rung higher on the ladder up the tree, connections being attainments, and connections of threads creating marmas, i.e. memories. H is also symbolic of the two realms, the above and the below, coming together in unity, similar to the symbol 8, the value of H, which also shows the higher macro uniting with the lower microcosm. The atomic age and the space age, together with the computer age, will open the gates of space-time and matter, the infinite within, the infinite without, and the infinite data contents, and bring about a new type of eonic sequence altogether. Time, space, and matter as light are but the rays of the lux and IAO emanating the ox, or the emanating the X and the O as wheels within wheels, denoting a kind of mechanical gear-like organization to the structure or edifice we call the universe, i.e. the Mahamudra Mandala. Not only within the large galactic stellar wheels are there smaller planetary and still yet atomic wheels within wheels, but deeper than the physically manifest wheels by which we measure space-time and the objects that appear within it, are more tenuous wheels within wheels, spiraling into manifestation from some unlocatable source, not only within the mind of each and every conscious being, but from a seeming grand central galactic source, which is at every point in space and time simultaneously on every plane or level of being. By identifying and mapping these zones, a wider insight is given into the organic mathematical matrix of manifestation, and mental mechanics can be significantly understood and otherwise more elusive mysteries unveiled. Yet another adept who received little recognition in the West, whose recent work I have found highly intriguing, particularly a recent working called The Natural Alchemy Building, which corresponds in part with a certain ordeal I had undergone on the same date he logs a significant event. The adept is Frank G. Rappel, the Italian author of many books still untranslated, but one I found called Magic of Atlantis, Authenoram. His Ordo Rose Mysticae and MEAPRMM are recalibrations of the OTO and the Egyptian Illuminati, and from what I can tell from translating some of his work, his views on matters occult are rather unique. His approach tends toward the left-hand path or draconian bent, see Culto Draconiano, and in The Natural Alchemical Building, Rappel says in the section The Bottomless Pit that on November 13, 2015, the demon of the pit, Abaddon, contacted him, after which he authorized the opening of the bottomless pit. He, with the key in his possession, opened it, and the scorpions, virus, went from the pit of the black energy. I found this highly ironic because I went and looked and saw in my own magical journal that I had been writing about the key of the abyss and the force field, which is also mentioned in his working, relating to the charges of 6 and 9, the magnetic field grid. In my journal, I specifically wrote, Kenneth Grant mentions that the O was related to 666, and the perfection, 438, of manifestation related to the incoming of the Aeon of Mayat, 999, the Aeon of Truth and Justice. 666 is also, of course, Therion and 2 Megatherion, but using the Hebrew-English gematria formula, Therion is dualized as 999. Thus, the true successor has found the key. Frater Mayan's Magical Journal, November 13, 2015. 999 is also the value of the word mefthak, or the key in Hebrew in full, and it is also the number of the key of it all, proving succinctly and consistently the magical child, or cherub, link of 210, the key of it all, between the Horus 93 current and the Mayat 696 current. 696 implies the combining of the 6 and 9 in the art of temperance. Yet another relation between Mayat to Muerte, Mut, Hebrew for death or dead, is via its link between 696 and the 218 current of Azerate, which is 696 spelled out, the Temple of the Black Light, whose central figure is the Saint of Death. Mayat, as meter of the dead, associates her with Muerte and Baphomet, both of whom are given altars and libations in much the same way. The key of it all is one and the same with the key of the abyss. The key cannot be said to be merely 666 or 999, it is all of the numbers, hence the key of it all. It is the key of the knowledge that conjoins the all with the abyss, and just as Yog-Sothoth is both the key and the gate, the key to the grand central galactic source is the grand central galactic source, again, which is all points. The key is the gate just as the question is the answer. This abyss is always open. We just aren't always open to it. The opening of the abyss signifies the activation, internally, externally, or both, or awakening of the coiled kundalini from its dreaming sleep, and the unsealing of the 7 seals is the alchemical transmutation of the dragon on its ascent through the 7 chakras. 6 and 9 are the ascending and descending currents of the dragon force channeled, charged, and released during ceremonial ritual. Just as the cross of Yod-He-Vav-He unfolds into the tetragrammatonic prism, the snowflake fractal tree of life unfolds into the illuminated cubed sphere Maya matrix we call materialized manifestation. Corresponding together, the symbol of the snowflake represents the holographic pattern emanating from the first sephira to the final, the transitory snow which crystallizes and dissolves during the storm of Typhon or the dragon, or the play of Leela or life. The crystallization into form begins at Kether in the world of Itzilith, the world of emanation, or radiation, emanating from the Ein, Ein Sof, Ein Sof Or, the triple veil of nothingness, which means nothing, infinity, and infinite light, which balance to form the infinite emanations from the O, the triple I of the dragon or god, or Hecate, Triglunos, as Kenneth Grant calls her. See the standing wave of Yod-He-Vav-He above, which represents the triple wheel or ring pass knot that is the spirit and body of the double current of the double-headed dragon or phoenix. Also, D. Margiata in Le Culte de la Naturelle dans la Franc-Maçonnerie Universelle, page 215, is quoted in Occult Theocracy, page 715, saying Baphomet can also be understood reversed. Reading Baphomet backwards, we get Tem, Off, Ob. Tem, duplex, Off, Ovis, Ob, generation. Duplex, Ovis, generation, the double bird of generation. Thus, the dragon, phoenix, Baphomet, and Yod-He-Vav-He are all different aspects of the same idea, the double current of manifestation and the unmanifest. The symbol of Baphomet is also related to the fractal snowflake, as it is a cross with crosses on the end, symbolizing the ever-going or ever-coming fractal star sponge. The name Satan itself, being originally Satan or Shaitan in Hebrew, Shin Teth Nun, is related to the stone, this STN or stone of the mysteries, the fallen stone of matter itself, which we experience as life, materiality, ego, samsara, etc. Thus, Satan is the lord of this world, and Satan is a manifestation of God, the manifestation of God. So again, Janus or Thamiel, the two faces. The AL being to LA non-being. It is, however, a great mistake to think the physical, which is merely the lowest and densest of planes, is somehow the only plane there is, or the only plane we are concerned with as spiritual beings having physical experiences. Breaking through the materialistic gate of Malkuth, awakening within the astral energy matrix of Yesod, attaining knowledge and conversation of the true self at Tiferet behind the mask of the beast, and obtaining the key of truth beyond the abyss of illusion, will induct the adept into the final gateway of the icy wastes of Kether, where simultaneity of parallel and alternate universes come together in a singularity of infinitized actuality, where all fractal spirals fold together back into the grain of sand, the seed, zero, the eye, the snowflake, the synaptic flash of omnific totality, and all bursts back forth into an ever-awakening, ever-coming one. The nature of God is to go. A true singularity would be beyond linear space-time. Thus, the Big Bang would not be before anything. It would be constantly occurring, similar to the Kabbalistic concept of Zimzum, containing as it does the source code of the matrix. 666 is a singularity digit of the fractal of manifestation. 666 is also the toroid number of the unified field of Sephiroth, the gnosis of which is hinted at in the soul symbol key, the omega point, the solar symbol, or the circle with the dot. Frater Akkad arranged his fractal model of the Tree of Life according to the 6-based hexagonal pattern which snowflakes themselves follow. In the Anatomy of the Body of God, he says that the Tree of Life is embedded in the snowflake. Its branches are as crystals, its flowers as the rose, and its perfect fruit is the dodecahedron. I have already touched upon this in the Diamond of Perfection, and will refer again to Iona Miller's article, The Dodecahedral Universe, which mentions an article from Nature, volume 425, October 9, 2003, by George F.R. Ellis, titled The Shape of the Universe, which claims that the microwave background radiation patterns resemble the pentagonal model of the dodecahedron. Thus, 78 years after Frater Akkad wrote about his Kabbalistic findings in the Anatomy of the Body of God in 1925, in 23 it would seem to have been confirmed. 78 being also a notable length of time itself, for it is the value of Mesla, the influence from Kether, also translating as zodiac and destiny or fate. The pentagon, implying the pentagram, contains the formula phi, as does the pentagram itself, which is the golden ratio present throughout the fractal universe, as well as the structure of the body of man. The golden thread is related to the astral thread, or Azoth, which is related to the mystical magical seed, Zro, or zero, which equates with 107, the formula of gold, i.e. the philosopher's stone, being yet also equivalent to 888, the number of Jesus, or Isus. It is thus also the Chrysos, which is also 107, or Christ force. 107, as the egg, is the key which unlocks the 999 chambers of 111, 222, 333, 444, 555, 666, 777, 888, and 999. And thus it is the key of it all. The Tree of Life and the space gates thereof are unveiled with this singular key which unlocks all other keys, since the O, or the zero, is the supreme gate of manifestation and demanifestation, or the unmanifest, on all planes. The triple stone of the One, as it's called in Liber Akbish, or the Ein Sof Or, the standing wave of manifestation, and the rings past cosmos, chaos, and naught, is the double serpent which begins at 000 and ends at 000, who, in the transcendental alchemical process, becomes the Hermes Trismegistus, or thrice great Hermes. This is the mystery of the Holy Grail and the lost wisdom of God, encased beneath the 9 arches, whereby the insight provided by the wisdom of the 5 keys is visiting the interior of the earth, Malkuth, whereby with the insight provided by the wisdom of the 5 keys, by visiting the interior of the earth, Malkuth, and by rectification, or purification, you will find the hidden stone. But rectification is also 777, so therefore symbolizing the 7 circles, and also correlating with revelation, but obviously being a little more alchemical and technically of a practical value. And so I'm going to read the, what is it? Chapter 5, the Madhyamaka and Crowley. A major element in the magical philosophy of AL is based upon the formula of 0 equals 2. And it says, the reader is referred to Crowley's essay on ontology in the Collected Works of Aleister Crowley, Volume 2, and to his considerations of the formula 0 equals 2 in the Book of Thought, which is fundamentally identical with the Hegelian dialectic. Since Crowley's death, however, it has been demonstrated physically that the realm of phenomenal structure is not transcended by a synthesis of 2 opposites to produce a third, but by the abolition of both concepts. The third element remains within the phenomenal realm. It does not transcend it. So again, the 4th state is implied. The formula is not, therefore, +1 or +1 plus -1, but the negation of the non-negative plus and the non-positive or minus. The resulting absence is total absence without trace of duality. This is not the case when 0 equals 2. The Buddhist doctrine of anatta, and anatta equals 71, lamb, the way. 71 is also the number of Sata, the serpent, which dwelleth in the uttermost parts of the earth. See the Book of the Dead. Alone of old eon doctrines, expresses this total transcendence of duality. Nagarjuna elaborated its implications in the Madhyamaka philosophy. It is worth remembering at this juncture that Blavatsky, whose work Crowley continued, was instructed by Buddhist teachers, Morya and Kuthumi. But although Crowley claimed to have continued her work, he did not in fact base his system on anatta, but upon the Hegelian dialectic. Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka, on the other hand, contains an effective means of liberation from phenomenal existence, which positivist systems cannot achieve, nor can they ever do so. Kuranzon, the functional aspect of the negating factor, is now forcing its entry into the terrestrial sphere. The system of occult philosophy represented by Blavatsky was reared upon the Buddhist doctrine of anatta, and it can in no way be reconciled with the positivist systems. And it's interesting because 333, I realized, being the Great Seal, that's the perfect translation of Mahamudra. And there's this whole thing about the ocean seal Samadhi, and this sort of concept of the seal being this veil of this whole concept of prasangika, which the whole Madhyamaka thing really, which it's how is there self if there's not self, and it's just this weird thing. It's like a fine line, and that's what the whole 333 seal thing apparently has to do with, because it's empty. It represents the emptiness that 333 and Kuranzon kind of represents, but obviously Kuranzon has this sort of evil, demonic sense, in the sense that it's it is that psychic veil or filter. I don't know. That's what 333 seems to represent. And so, being this Buddha's Tathagatagarbha, Buddhist text and Buddhist teachers, all these things like that again come together essentially in 666, but also 999 being the 333s. Again, it sounds like what the fuck, but there's so many different formulas that are like, it's the fact that these certain things do come in this weird, you could say full circle, but I'll eventually get into Huayan more, but it's this interpenetration and simultaneity of stuff, like information and events in a sense. It's just this time barrier has something to do with this whole thing. And basically, I don't know, Madhyamaka is very insightful, I guess, or like it's a key to all this, but it takes obviously a cognition as far as understanding it and applying it, I guess, or seeing how it applies, I guess. Madhyamaka maintains the proposition of absolute zero. Crowley's essay on ontology tended to confirm this, but he did not continue long to uphold this position. Bereshith, 1901, see Crowley's Collected Works, Volume 2. Instead, he adopted the Hegelian dialectic with its union of opposites, of which the product can be only and inevitably yet another entity. The result of the union of two phenomenal entities is a third phenomenal entity. Even when this is not, it contains within itself the seed of duality, for on this system 0 equals 2, and we are not thereby released from the phenomenal framework. The doctrine of Chan, or Chan, essentially Zen, known sometimes as the wordless doctrine, is suggestive of the wordless eon, which involves the negation or resolution of phenomena. The process is symbolized by Choronzon, or Choronzane, a name which signifies the perichoresis of two distinct dimensions, the phenomenal and the noumenal. Zane, or Zain, Zain, is the serpent of chaos typified by the Ain, the eye, noumenally the eye. Crowley notes that the only power that may overcome Choronzon is silence. This is because silence is his ultimate nature. Aiwass is the minister of Horpar-Krat, the god of silence in the ovoid of space, the babe in the egg referred to in AL. The name Choronzon also comprehends Chronos, elemental time, and Zane, the sword which divides intemporality, or noumenon, into time, phenomena. The Christ declared that he came to bring not peace, but a sword, which is an allegorical mode of adumbrating the eon of Zane. I speak in parables so that they may not understand. As this would follow upon the eon of Osiris, it is evident that Zane equates with Horus, or rather with his twin, Set, the silent or wordless eon, Horpar-Krat. It would seem that Horus typifies not an eon, but the power that initiates the wordless eon of Choronzane. We may have here also a key to the mysteries of Maat, or Mot, for Maat is the balance. She represents the eon in which the woman stands girt with a sword, Zane, before me. AL chapter 3, verse 11. The scales of the balance hide a symbolism suggestive of the squamous robes of the deep ones, as the world of shells suggests their habitation in the deeps of space. 10, the number of the ether in which Choronzon appeared to Crowley, is significant in this connection, for the one beyond 10, i.e. 11, designates the world of shells. The number 11 typifies not only the Qliphoth, but the mode of evoking them via the double current. The two ones that are none, 0 equals 2. None, or none, by paranomasia, is the fish, the zootype of the deep ones. Christ was represented by the Gnostics as Ichthys, the fish. It may be noted that all along the line, the symbolism confirms and establishes the cult of Cthulhu as being identical with that of Choronzon, of time, and of that which is beyond time. That which is beyond time is typified by Ain, in its Ophidian form, Z or Zain. In other words, the eon of Aiwass, or Horparkrat, remains outside the circles of time. The circle, O, Ain. Are we not justified, therefore, in alluding to the eon of Horus as the eon of Choronzon? Yes and no. The duration of an eon is not necessarily 2,000 years, or any other protracted period of time. The word eon also denotes an infinitesimally fleeting moment, the Buddhist Kshana. An immeasurable period, the no time required, perhaps to trigger the eon of Ma'at. This would explain the dread pertaining to the notion of Choronzon, of Horus, as associated with war and destruction, and of Aiwass, minister of the god of silence, resulting from total negation. The Reverend Montague Summers considered Crowley's use of the Horus concept with reference to the present eon as a shamming, flaming name, having nothing at all to do with Horus, the son of Isis, the lord of the celestial ladder, the day god worshipped in ancient Egypt. This lord of the eon, the crowned and conquering child by the elder brother, as he was fearfully and blasphemously called by the degraded Manichees, is the power of evil, Satan. See Witchcraft and Black Magic, page 180. This erudite divine indeed divined a certain wrongness in the notion of Horus thus represented, but by virtue of his conditioning he was unable to properly identify the power behind the phenomenon of disintegration. This he naturally assumed to be the devil, and he recognized it in the appalling specter of destruction that haunts humanity today. Human societies have always tended to deteriorate, but it has hitherto been possible in many cases to apply countermeasures. However, now that the evolutionary impulse is waning, there can be expected a mass regression to primitive communal forms of society, wherein the individual as such is virtually abolished. One can accept such a state of affairs and ebb with the tide, or one can assert one's individuality, as creative artists have ever tended to do, in an attempt to combat the entropy. But this will not now succeed, as occasionally it did in past phases of history, because humanity is approaching the nadir of the Kali Yuga. There is, however, one viable alternative. This is the negative way exemplified by Advaitin, forms of metaphysical culture, and in particular by the Zen Buddhism of Sheshtayana, the Supreme Vehicle. The negative way demands personal disidentification through the realization of anatta, with the phenomenal noumenal world play. It is noteworthy that anatta equals 71, using Teth's lamb, in that anatma is 102, lamal, a palindrome that expresses the true cult of lamb, as the transmitter to AL of LA, not via Ma. 102 is the number of Nu and Mu, 56 and 46. Mu is a synonym of Lemuria. It is significant in this connection that the Arunachala Hill, the cult center of Advaita, in South India dates back to Lemurian days. See Sri Maharshi by S. Kamath, 3rd edition, page 44. Arunachala is celebrated in the ancient Skanda Purana. The Vedantic form of anatta, i.e. anatma, with a tau, is 493, the number of Zad Manas Ziba. Nothing manifests in any form. Its other number, 253, is that of Al-Hazred, the number of the mad Arab, who transmitted the gnosis of the Necronomicon. And 253 is also the number of gnosis. It is necessary at this point to introduce seemingly diverse considerations. The three most powerful cults in the world of matter today appear as three distinct expressions of the number 31, which in combination constitute the 93 current. They are Crowley's Cult of Al with its talisman, the Book of the Law, Al. 2. Frater Akkad's Cult of La with its talisman, Liber 31. And 3. Austin Spare's Zoskia Cultus with its psychology of ecstasy culminating in the Neither Neither. In Cults of the Shadow, I indicated affinities between the cult of Ma, 46, and Akkad's concept of 31 as the negative reflection of Al. Frater Akkad formulated by means of his mirror magic a Kabbalah of the negative which has profound affinities with the theory of protoplasmic reversion, utilized by Arthur Machen in several of his extraordinary tales. See The Great God Pan, The Inmost Light, N, to name a few. At about the time Crowley embarked upon his equinox period, Austin Osman Spare was elaborating his doctrine of the Kia, which he described as the philosophy of Neither Neither. That Crowley was involved in similar researches is proved by his preoccupation with the ancient Chinese formula 0 = 2. Spare likewise was introducing into his system the Asiatic metaphysic of the Madhyamaka, or middle position, which eschewed the two extremes. Existence is and non-existence not is. Avoiding both extremes, Crowley and Spare adopted a stance which reflected neither. Spare reflected back even further and assumed a standpoint of Neither Neither, which represents precisely the Madhyamaka position, although it is rather the abolition of all positions, for Kia implies not only neither is nor is not, but also neither either of these. The Kia is based upon a double negative reminiscent of the Chinese formula of double absence, or absolute absence. See the works of Wei Wu Wei for a masterly treatment of this formula of Shen Hui. This is the periphery of the circle which touches Spare's Kia, and which formulates the process of attainment through absent-mindedness elaborated in Spare's The Book of Pleasure. There are in this complex far more than stray threads of Oriental metaphysics, vital though they are to an understanding of the 93 mystique and its prominence in contemporary occultism. It is not possible to explain the formula in conceptual language because there is no language that is not dualistic. Approximately, noumenon non-duality may be realized by the abolition not of the positive factor alone, but also by the negation of the negative factor which remains after that abolition. This so it makes me think of what's called residue in mathematics. This double process results not in an absence, and so this whole Madhyamaka thing has to do with letting go of that subconscious backlog, I guess, of what we hold on to and all this other stuff. So this double process results not in an absence, which implies a presence, but a double absence, which abolishes the presence implied by the initial absence. What remains is total or absolute absence, known in Buddhist terms as sunyata, void. Spare did not fall into the error of 0 = 2. His not is absolute zero, for it is from total nothingness that phenomena arise. The creative occultist has necessarily to revert to this primal void in order to encounter the source of materialization. No other formula permits change to occur in conformity with will, which is Crowley's definition of magic, the science of illusion, or appearances only. It is doubtful if Crowley intuited this fact, although Frater Akkad or Achad seems to be vaguely aware of it. The matter is adumbrated in Akkad's official and unofficial correspondence, hitherto unpublished, which now, in 2020, it has been. See Cults of the Shadow, Chapter 8. Spare most certainly was, and it enabled him to establish conscious contact with intelligence outside space and time, themselves the framework of dualistic thought. Space and time are necessary adjuncts to the perceiving consciousness. In other words, space and time rise and fall together with the appearance manifested within them. Crowley did not achieve contact from his side. For when Aiwass communicated with him, it was at the will of Aiwass. The rent in the fabric of space, the warp in the sequence of time, occurred not at the pleasure of Crowley, but of Aiwass. Spare, on the other hand, seemed able to anticipate these rents and warps because he understood profoundly the in-betweenness concepts, the middle position, Madhyamaka, which is no position at all, for it is the negation of the two positive concepts, is and not is. Freder Achad also realized that in order to discover God, it is necessary to revert to the primordial word, but it is doubtful if he realized the void nature of that word. So again, it's the void that shapes things. Merely that the word Allah, meaning according to Freder Achad, God, Al, is not, La, adds up to 93, in that it formulated the negative current which invokes the primal God who is truly no God. See Al, chapter 2, verse 23. I am alone, there is no God where I am. In Spare's system, the symbol of the I, or I, is the Kia, 31. In order that the two things may unite, they must appear simultaneously. This they can never do because two thoughts and objects, or objects, cannot occur simultaneously in consciousness. Identity, i.e. unity, may be found only in the negation of both thoughts. Furthermore, words are expressions of thoughts and feelings, whereas noumenon is beyond both thoughts and feelings. Therefore, silence alone can express that which is beyond, or outside. A close study of Freder Achad's correspondence concerning the Aeon of Maat reveals how closely he came to comprehending the reality underlying 93. However, he seems to have understood it as a combination of positive and negative elements, rather than as neither positive nor negative. Although I did not know Freder Achad personally, I knew both Crowley and Spare, and my feelings are that Spare was aware that reality was neither Al nor La, rather that it was the absence of both, or neither. In this realization, Achad resembled Alan Bennett, who at an early age experienced fleeting absorption in reality and spent the remainder of his life endeavoring to realize it as the natural state. Alan Bennett was Crowley's guru in matters Eastern. See the Confessions of Aleister Crowley. Bennett's stand was essentially Buddhistic. Nox, night, is the symbol of neither. One of its numbers, 210, or 70 times 3, signifies 0, the cube root of 0, which, as 000, formulates the Kabbalistic Ein Sof Or. One of the communications received by Crowley in Liber Trigramaton begins with the words, "Here is nothing under its three forms." The verse is numbered 000, and the communication in question is based upon the Chinese system of the Yin-Yang Tao. Liber Trigramaton was described by Crowley as an account of the cosmic process, corresponding to the stanzas of Xian. The basis of the secret doctrine is expounded by H. P. Blavatsky in her work of that name. Xian is equivalent to the Chinese Chan, Sanskrit Jnana, non-conceptual knowledge. This present communication is numbered 27, the number not only of Zayu, the root of Xian, but also of Aku, the moon god, worshipped in some places under the name of Sin, and of Bati, the hideous gnomes referred to by Blavatsky. See The Secret Doctrine, Chapter 3, page 18, or maybe volume. I have previously noted in another context that Bati may be a contraction of Balasti. See Al, Chapter 3, verse 54. The gnomes suggest the tunnels of Set and the thrones underground, mentioned in the Kabbalahs of Beskul. See Outside the Circles of Time. That Crowley was aware of the implications of this apotheosis of the irrational, i.e. the cube root of 0, is evident from the passage in his Confessions. The meditation of this afternoon resulted in an initiation so stupendous that I dare not hint at its word. In a single instant I had the key to the whole of the Chinese wisdom. In the light, momentary glimpse as it was, of this truth, all systems of religion and philosophy became absolutely puerile. Even the law, i.e. the law of Thelema, appears no more than a curious incident. It baffles me to understand how my brother Magi, knowing this, ever went on. A little farther on, Crowley acknowledged that this experience had shaken him utterly. The secret comes along the path of Aleph to Chakma. It occurred in 1918. So, let's see. Which is the manner of saying that it comes from the outside, the tree of life. Crowley observed of this secret that it has the might to hurl every master of the temple into the abyss, and to fling every adept of the rose cross down to the Qliphoth. The Confessions, chapter 86, page 840. This because the Qliphoth is the source of the shells or space capsules that traverse the abyss between man and extraterrestrial consciousness. And so I just found that the time capsule, or maybe it's plural, the time capsules is 333. So there is a solution of continuity between the upper triad of the tree resumed by the Kether-Chakma-Bina complex and the terrestrial human power zones. The mystery may better be understood in relation to the dynamics of the equation. +1 or +1 plus -1 or -1 equals 0, which consists in a positive and a negative element combined to produce naught. But this naught is qualified. It is not absolute 0 because duality is not transcended by the operation. It remains latent in the product, naught, which equals 2. It thus remains within a phenomenal framework. To obtain pure nothingness, Knox, the formula cannot be one of union or synthesis, for duality may be abolished only by the negation of the two opposing or complementary elements. Thus, the non-negative +1 plus the non-positive -1 equal non-2, which is Advaita or non-duality. The difference in physical terms is unnoticeable because both formulae yield nothing, but metaphysically the difference is total, because the residual nothing is absolute nothing or nothingness, the two having been utterly abolished. And it's funny because this whole concept of Dvaita and Advaita, I think it's, Dvaita Vedanta? D-V-A-I-T-A-V-E-D-A-N-T-A. Yeah, Dvaita Vedanta is 107, which is that whole Akasha thing. So what he's talking about is the Akasha Tattva being tied up in this phenomenal framework and sequence. Essentially, like even though it's 0, it's still tied up in this duality. And 107 is obviously this whole this final hey thing. And so I've been trying to figure this out, but obviously Advaita, which is more popular than the Dvaita, because Dvaita means dualistic, Advaita means non-dual, and it's 108, which is again that more popular Hindu number. It's also kind of more geometrically not popular but common, but it shows 107 being that sort of like Kolel or one down or whatever, I don't know, which it has its own unique properties. It shows that sort of underlying field of the Akasha. But anyway, in magico-mystical terminology, this is the difference between Nuit and Nox. Various gematria of these terms enable us to conduct an analysis on levels within the phenomenal framework, which nonetheless include extra-phenomenal, though not noumenal, implications. The number of Nuit with tau, 466, is the number of Hast, so Hastur or Haster. Hast also equals 75, a number of Nuit. The goddess at the gate of heaven by night, the Book of the Dead, Budge's translation, and of Golgoth, the skull, symbol of death and the mystery of crossing over from existence to non-existence. So basically the gate. 108, a number of Nox or night, is a number of silence, see chapter 8, and is therefore connected with Lam in the silent eon, Nun 50, Vav 6, Samek 60, and Mabad, meaning outside, and of Satali, the whirlpool. Whatsoever falleth therein or is drawn down by it is lost beyond all redemption. See Montague Summers' The Vampire in Europe, page 97. Satali, or Satali, is an analog of the black hole. 116 also indicates Galena, the tree of crucifixion in the Dogon cult, and a form of Golgotha. 116 is one less than Lam. Aleph is 1. It is attributed to the path of air or space. Lam being 71, and then plus Mu, 46. And according to the Necronomicon, Lam-Mu is the name of the first of the twins born of the Ancient Ones. Lam concentrates the twin. The Ophidian double current is represented in the stellar gnosis by Gemini, the twins, and by the letter Zain, a sword, or double current, and Mu represents the deep or outer ones. Another form of Nox, as Nu with Zadi, the letter Zadi represents a fishhook, is 146, or Baba Kuma, the first gate. The number 146 is also that of Kensu, the great strider through the night sky, and of Suf, to make an end of, or put to the sword, another reference to Zain. But the most important number of Nox is 210, the reflex of 012, or 012, the formula of creation, thus denoting the oblivion resulting from putting to an end. 210 is the number of the great old ones, the giants, or Nephilim, the fallen ones, i.e. fallen to earth, or abortions, and of Cherub, a sword. The zootype of Nox is the Hlohlo, 210, the spider idol glyph of the Arachnean Gnosis. 000 as An is 210, or nothingness under its three forms, and embodies a cosmic doctrine identical with that of Zayan, or Zain. 210 is also the number of Lol Meme, ages or eons. That's funny, Lol Meme. This concept refers to the formula of non-duality, not to the total negation of subject and object, the self and other. That Crowley was unable to accept the doctrine of non-duality may be seen from Magic Without Tears, letter entitled The Universe, the 0 = 2 equation. Lovecraft, too, recoiled from the full implications of the doctrine of Advaita, no less than from its negative application in the Buddhist doctrine of anatta. Lovecraft declares, "Merging with nothingness is peaceful oblivion, but to be aware of existence and yet to know that one is no longer a definite being distinguished from other beings, that one no longer has a self, that is the nameless summit of agony and dread." See Through the Gates of the Silver Key in At the Mountains of Madness, page 414. However, both Crowley and Lovecraft missed the crux of the matter, which is that without the self, subject, there can be no objects, no existence, and no entity, and therefore no identity. The self cannot be a thing because subject cannot be an object, and we can know and conceive only objects. It is surprising, but the most rapid abhorrence and most hopeless confusion are engendered by this subject in minds otherwise crystal clear and diamond sharp. Franz Kafka, for example, has this to say about the matter. Indian religious writings attract and repel me at the same time. Like poison, there is something both seductive and horrible in them. All these yogis and sorcerers rule over the life of nature not because of their burning love of freedom, but because of a concealed and icy hatred of life. The source of Indian religious devotions is a bottomless pessimism. Indian religious writings here refer to the Advaitin and Buddhist texts of the Anatta school. The quotation comes from Conversations with Franz Kafka, Janusz, page 85. That which Crowley describes as the power of the vision to fling every adept down to the Qliphoth, in which Kafka describes as bottomless pessimism, is the doctrine of anatta presented by the Madhyamikas. Both writers have failed to understand the doctrine. And so again, people have also said, whenever I'm reading about Madhyamaka, that people misunderstand it as nihilism and pessimism. It should, however, be remembered that when Crowley wrote on Buddhism, certain vital Mahayana texts in English translation were not available. See Crowley, Collected Works, Articles Bereshith in Science and Buddhism. I refer particularly to the texts of the Prajna Paramita school. Crowley shows no acquaintance with the work of Nagarjuna, who was among the first to penetrate the essential philosophy of Buddhism and to present it stripped of accretions. The formula of Nagarjuna's dialect is free of the positivism leading, as Crowley after Hegel, to further unresolvable conflicts, and it paves a way for the true formula of 93 which Frater Achad developed from his word of 1926, Alala, or more precisely, Lala-al. Being, AL, rests on non-being, LA. Not being, LA, rests on not being, La-la-al. The supreme triad, therefore, is La-la-al. 93. La 31, La 31, AL 31. The world of phenomena is called Sangsar by the Hindus. It means the moving or the mobile. Motion, oh my god, so the first law of motion, however, is illusory because there is no thing, no object to move. Objects are mere objects of consciousness and cannot exist apart from it. The illusion of movement is created by the mind's inability to entertain more than one thought at a time. Hence thoughts, things, appear serially and are apparently projected by the mind into space, where they assume objective existence. But the space in which they seem to appear is itself a thought, and together with time constitutes the mechanism of manifestation or duality, i.e. subject recognizing objects. Ultimate subjectivity contains the seed of sangsar, as deep sleep contains the latency of thought, dream, which appears only when subjectivity objectivizes. Sleep then becomes dreaming. The final process is one of objectification, as distinct from objectivization, which causes the illusion of a waking state in which the thoughts or dream objects are experienced as real. Total absence of objects, as in deep sleep, is thus the total presence of subject, whose manifestation then appears phenomenally as sangsar, the universe. But this fact is lost sight of when subject objectivizes, i.e. dreams, or objectifies, awakens. Total absence of sangsar is therefore total presence of self, and vice versa, which explains why the Jivan-mukta sees nothing objective. Time and space rise. An enlightened being who is liberated from conditioned existence whilst still appearing to be incarnate. Time and space rise simultaneously with the ego, which splits subject, self, into subject and all its objects. The universe therefore appears to exist in totality, although the mind, ego, can but serialize it sequentially. It is this process that creates the illusion of movement of time, past, present, and future. In deep sleep, all this is latent, in toto. As in the acorn is the oak with all its branches, leaves, and twigs. So again, the seed being 333, relating to the time stations. It evolves or appears to emerge only when thought produces the illusion of movement in consciousness, and thus comports the notions time and space. When these appear, then sangsar appears, but all three are just that, mere appearances. The eighth sphere mentioned, A.P. Sinnett, Esoteric Buddhism, in the older occult writings is typified on the Tree of Life by the 11th Sephira, Doth. This is the eighth sphere counting upwards from the earth. It is also the height, or summit, so far as concerns the human life wave. For there is a solution of continuity between the 7 spheres below the abyss and the upper triad. The point of vagueness, or discontinuity, has been called the Mauve zone. So I instantly just got a flash of Tibet, being so high up, and it's weird. You can't live there for too long. if you're not from there. The plateau of Lang. It is the place at which the tree itself fades into voidness. The obloquy heaped upon doth by the proponents of the old aeon dispensation is the outcome of a concentrated revulsion from the truth that noumenon is inaccessible to human consciousness, as to any other qualified form of consciousness. The truth is that no thing, no entity or concept, and this includes the tree of life, exists above the abyss. The tree appears to be the tree only within the framework of conceptual thought, which is wholly phenomenal and has therefore only an apparent existence. The Mauve or mallow zone is typified by the swamp because it is neither firm land, earth, nor water, heaven. It is the gateway to voidness, the outer gateway par excellence. It is evident that there can be no such thing as an object because an object implies a subject to cognize it, thus creating duality. This is apparent only, for reality is non-dual, advaita. Duality is the advaita. Duality is the ultimate blasphemy typified in theologies by Le Diable, the double one. Double one is 11, or 1-1, 11, the number of the Tlofoth, or world of shells, a hollow and wholly phantasmal agglomeration of energy specters. There is no subject, only subjectivity. And so this whole thing is related to this 666 as samsara, and 777 being the world of shells also, is like, it's that step up from beyond, in a sense, the time, that sort of, I don't know, there's some process of time, and it's all conveyed in these various Buddhist texts and stuff, and concepts. Objectivity is merely its apparent objectification. The process of objectification is known as the ego-making faculty. So, and then that rectification in the whole formula of vitriol, by going in or underground, the interiora essentially, and then coming back, you have the I don't remember the exact, translation. It's in here though, actually, also. But basically, rectification being 777 is very symbolic as well. And libertinos in Greek being the liberation, and the whole sword, the flaming sword, etc. And the Furpa, it's like, and the scorpion guru, it's all just there. It's crazy. By it is reified what is visualized or thought. So again, 107. So Manju. See Hecate's Fountain, 1992. So that is crazy. That chapter was like very influential years ago. And that's how I was able to find this book, because it caught my eye one day. This foundational standpoint of Madhyamika philosophy, and even though it's very thin, it is still very profound. It is very deep, and it connects with, again, the Prajnaparamita, which slowly opened the doorway. This has been a long time coming, in a sense. I've had this book, a manual, or I couldn't remember the title. It's freaking, it's like a bad title, I think, but it's an anthology of well-spoken advice. And I had gotten that years ago at Half Price Books, but I didn't really understand the profundity of it until slowly, again, this whole Gelug, whole tradition, has, through the Lam Rim Chenmo teachings, and Alex Wayman, and Herbert Gunther, Edward Kahns, all these different things have slowly come up again. Well, not again, but they're coming up as being super profound, and I'm glad that I had this sort of introduction to get into it. But again, there's these weird codes, I guess you could say, and it's not surprising when you understand, again, the things from the Lankavatara Sutra that really helped to understand, Yogacara and Vijnanavada or Vijnanavada. These sort of concepts help to explain this numerology thing, because it shows that everything is a sort of a sequence, essentially. A sequence of veils. Sequence of lives. But I don't know, I just wanted to read that, and I wanted to go over this, even though there's way more I wanted to say about it, especially this wheel concept, but I'm just going to have to take it slowly over more time. But obviously the next chapter, or the other chapter that I wanted to read, the Secrets of Ancient Geometry, I wanted to read the cuneiform chapter as well right before that, but I figured if I'm going to eventually try to make a PDF of it so that it can be available, it's too profound and like important not to be. I'll just save that for that. But that other chapter is very important because, again, the circle, the grid, the triangles, it's super, like, I don't know, basic. Madhyamaka happens to be 123, I remember, which is also kind of funny. But it's very simple. But anyway, I'll go take this further here soon. Chapter 18, ABC of the Modern Alphabet. The preceding chapter closed with the discovery that a product of the temple in India, i.e. Hindu-Arabic numerals, arrived in the Euphrates-Tigris region to displace cuneiform numerals. One of their outstanding qualities was their suitability for inscription on the numerous writing materials evolved to take the place of clay tablets. The Hindu-Arabic symbols, also known in modern Europe as Gobar numerals, were spread from India to Persia, from there to Babylon, and thence throughout the whole of the cultural world. But, though the numerals were well known and approved by leaders of northern civilizations, it took some time to persuade the relevant temple authorities that cuneiform ought to be replaced entirely. The latter, after all, was well established and highly suitable for writing in soft clay, and, moreover, cuneiform possessed both numerals and letters and syllables, whereas the new system was only one of numerals only. The new writing materials, principally papyrus, were recognized as more convenient than clay. They could not be used for cuneiform, so a new form of writing had to be invented to complement the numerals produced by the Indians. Invent a new form of writing. Rather easily said, but what a task. Not only did the appearance of the actual symbols have to be decided, but the temple authorities had to be persuaded that the move was beneficial, and that it was time cuneiform script, used for thousands of years, gave way to a more progressive and rational system of writing. Launching a new written language in those days was a feat of persuasion, brainwork, and daring. Imagine proposing to the peoples of Britain and America the English language is outdated and should be replaced altogether by another which has not yet even been invented. Such was the boldness of the plan to switch from cuneiform writing to a new system. It succeeded, but it took time. There was no mass communications, no television, newspapers, or advertisements to assist publicity of the new script. Admittedly, the circles of scribes affected was relatively small by present-day standards, but distance and communications were a hindrance. For a long time, cuneiform and the new scripts rode side by side, the former dominating, but gradually progress won ahead. The first recognized system of writing following and interlapping with hieroglyphics and cuneiform was that of the Phoenicians, who flourished around 1000 BC. The oldest surviving trace of their writing was discovered carved on a stone at Dibon, a village in central Jordan, the Moabite stone, as it has been called, and contains a record of the successes gained by the Moabite king Mesha against Israel. The inscription is also referred to as the Mesha or Mesa inscription. The Moabite stone was found in 1868 by Bedouins who smashed it in several pieces in the hope of increasing the value of their find. It was obtained and assembled as well as possible by the French researcher M. Clermont-Ganneau, and is now on display in the Louvre. Its approximate dating is 850 BC, and the inscription has been described as the oldest documentary example of Hebrew language and script. The stone in its present state is illustrated in figure 321. The smooth portions of the surface represent the parts that Clermont-Ganneau was unable to trace. The text, reconstructed as far as possible, is seen in figure 322, and is reproduced from Die Inschrift des König Mesa von Mauve by Rudolf Smend and Albert Sosin, Freiburg, 1886. The inscription is made up of 22 letters, which are to be found assembled in Geschichte der Griechisch-Römischen script by Arthur Mentz Leipzig, 1920. To avoid any error in reproducing the Mesha alphabet, the letters were photographed and appear in figure 323. Mentz himself wrote of the script, Dies Schriftzeichen sind im Großen und Ganzen gleichformig. Gewiss siegen selbst die Buchstaben der Mesa-Inschrift, die als Prunkschrift recht sorgfältig geschrieben ist, klein Abweichungen in der Richtung unter der Formung der Linien. Aber die Einheitlichkeit ist doch groß. Thus, in Mentz's opinion, although the 22 letters are different, they nevertheless have a strong family resemblance. They possess a plain, uncluttered, simple look. Despite wide variation in the slope of some of the symbols, the mutual resemblance is obvious, although Mentz was unable to put a finger on the factor that bonds the letters into a family. His observation was sharp, particularly since he had no idea that in fact such a clear link existed, the same link as bound together the cuneiform wedges, ancient geometry. The script of the Phoenicians, shared by King Mesha and his Moabite people, who were of the same Semitic branch as the Phoenicians, apparently came to life in the temple of these sea traders. Familiar with the system of triangulation from which cuneiform characters were derived, Phoenician priests examined the new Hindu-Arabic numerals and realized that they were produced from a different geometric diagram. They thus, in their search for a fresh script to accompany the new numerals, selected a similar geometric diagram from which to choose their rational system of 22 symbols. We see the diagram in figure 324. It comprises a circle surrounded by a square, and with a second square inscribed within the circle. We recall that the outer and inner squares are in the ratio 2:1. Guidelines are entered, vertical and diagonal crosses, together with two acute angled triangles. This would indicate that the Phoenicians did not have sufficient variety with the square-circle-square combination to produce 22 differing symbols. It is also possible that the acute angled triangles were included to confuse any attempt to trace the basis of the alphabet's formation. Another factor worth noting is the number of letters in the alphabet. 22. Esoteric tradition demanded that temple initiation lasted 22 years if the candidate was to obtain the full course of knowledge. The two figures tally. Intention or coincidence? Before we have a look at the most likely source from which these letters originated, we ought to bear in mind, once again, that whether numerals or letters, such symbols must have had a recognized source from which they could be reconstructed, particularly when printing as we know it did not exist and when writing was executed by hand. It would be impossible to manufacture, write, or maintain 22 shapes unless they were based on a diagram. If drawn entirely from the imagination of a temple priest, no matter how powerful or authoritative his status, the symbols would rapidly degenerate and disappear. And there is no doubt that the Phoenician script did not disappear. As the Encyclopedia Britannica points out, the Phoenicians rendered one great service to literature. They took a large share in the development and diffusion of the alphabet which forms the foundation of Greek and of all European writing. The Phoenician letters in their earlier types are practically identical with those used by the Hebrews, the Moabites, and the Aramaeans of North Syria. Without the geometric diagram to guide temple scribes and to regulate the appearance of the script, the letters would quickly have become unrecognizable. The Greeks increased the number of symbols to nearly 100, all within the framework of the ancient geometric diagram. Letters and handwriting today are a natural part of our education and culture. We all know, having been taught in school, how letters should look, although our handwritten reproduction of the letters may leave much to be desired. It is interesting in this connection to read of tests conducted with word-blind children who have difficulty in recalling the shape of individual letters. In a recent test in Denmark, one young girl wrote, "Dear Father, I am writing father with a small f because I cannot remember how to make a capital F." Our school teachers taught us how to write the model standard letters. They in turn had been instructed by higher authorities. It is perhaps feasible in a tiny society to invent a written language based on symbols drawn entirely from the imagination, if the community is self-supporting and cut off from the outside world. But as soon as the script is taken outside the community, it is impossible for anyone else to understand it. When the symbols are repeated outside the community, who can check their resemblance to the original imaginative shapes? And how much will the individual's personal handwriting affect the symbols, formation, etc.? When these in turn are copied time and time again by strangers perhaps learning the alphabet, there is little doubt that the original shapes will soon be forgotten, and the result will be degeneration and death of the bastard alphabet. But if a system or diagram of fixed image exists on which the alphabet was originally based, then degeneration of the symbols is much less likely. It is not within the scope of our research to establish the date, even approximately, of the invention of Phoenician script. The only date we have is that of the Moabite stone. Archaeologists have studied its content, surroundings, background, etc., and have reached the conclusion that it was carved about 850 BC. Before the engraving process, the symbols of King Mesha were probably sketched on the stone in chalk, so although there exists today as symbols gouged into a slab of stone, the carving work is really a kind of printed copy of handwritten signs. There is no reason whatever to suppose that the stone was the most popular means of writing at that period. It is more a question of what is likely to have survived a span of nearly 3,000 years. A carved stone can readily survive that length of time, so can a clay tablet if it is stored in favorable conditions. Less robust materials are likely to crumble and decay. If some catastrophe hit our planet at this very moment and the bulk of the world's population were wiped out, throwing man back into primitive life, our culture, including literature, paintings, manuscripts, etc., would be buried under a heap of ruins. After several thousand years, a new developing mankind would emerge, and at some point in their lives, the Earth's new inhabitants would perhaps begin digging in the ruins and sand to learn about the past. They would probably uncover our gravestones, memorials, and perhaps a few signs manufactured in metal, but all fabrics, paper, leather, etc., would have rotted and decayed into non-existence. Their inscriptions would be lost to searching archaeologists. In those circumstances, it would be erroneous indeed for the searchers to assume that our writing materials in 1967 consisted only of stone and metal, simply because they had found those materials. When we in turn assess the surviving relics of Egyptian culture, we discover wall surfaces decorated with hundreds of hieroglyphic symbols and figures. These inscriptions have survived time, and thus we know how Egyptian script looked. We also know from illustrations on temple walls that the Egyptians were experts in manufacturing fine linen materials, and that they are recorded as the inventors of papyrus. It is thus both natural and reasonable to assume that the Egyptians and similar nations of their era, including the Phoenicians, possessed more convenient writing materials than slabs of stone. A rock pillar may be an imposing sight covered in hieroglyphic symbols, but it makes a poor substitute for paper or other easily handled materials when a message has to be transported over long distances, or when notes have to be taken simply in order to remember a few facts, such as household accounts. Solon's father is reported by Plato as telling of a discussion he had with an old Egyptian priest about 700 BC, during which the priest mentioned that scribes of the Egyptian temple had made written records of every occurrence of major interest both within and outside Egypt. This diary had been maintained for so long that the Egyptians were able to tell the Greeks of events that took place in Greece before the flood. The tale is recounted in Plato's Critias, and even with a pinch of salt on the veracity of the story, there can be little doubt that the Egyptians had at their disposal more convenient writing materials than stone. The Phoenicians, although not recorded by history as having erected anything like the Great Pyramid, were also extremely advanced in their culture. They were also merchants of the finest caliber. It is equally certain that they, too, possessed other writing materials than stone, and that these influenced the creation and popularity of new scripts, forcing cuneiform into the background so successfully that it was a completely forgotten factor until its rediscovery in the 17th century AD. The new method or style of writing had its good and bad points. It could be executed by hand on suitable materials, but precisely because it was written by hand, it presented considerable opportunity to depart from the original symbol functions, perhaps so far from the original that the latter threatened to be lost completely. This was the position when the Phoenicians wrote their symbols, and later passed these on to the Greeks. Much later, when printing was developed, the original symbols were brought to light. It was much easier in print to retain a standard form of letter than when the letters were written by free hand, just as it had been easy for temple carvers to produce a standard cuneiform wedge for printing on clay tablets. The exact shape and slope of some of the Mesha stone symbols, and of symbols subsequently found of the same type, vary somewhat depending on the researcher. It is difficult, perhaps, for a scholar to reproduce a script exactly in every detail if he is not aware that the length, height, slope, and proportions of the letters in reality fit into the strict, accurate geometrical diagram. I have chosen to analyze the symbols reproduced in Mentz's book, not because they fit more readily into my analytical diagrams than the symbols of other scholars, but because his work is of a more serious and comprehensive nature than many of his colleagues, without at the same time delving too deeply into the origin of the script in relation, for example, to hieroglyphs and other systems of writing. In the coming analysis, I shall use photographic reproductions of Mentz's symbols. The Phoenician alphabet was written from right to left. The number above each symbol, therefore, in figure 323, refers not to the symbol's phonetic or other value, but to the position in the alphabet. Confronting the Phoenician Moabite letters with their original parent symbol, we shall find that the three letters 6, 8, and 21 out of 22 do not fit exactly into the symbol, or rather the alternatives leave a suspicion of doubt about the correct answer. But on reflection, it must be agreed that it is readily incredible that 19 out of 22 symbols retained an unmistakable resemblance to their original geometric parent, in spite of the fact that they were written in hand and carved by a human being, with all the idiosyncrasies of the human individual. When a number of symbols are constructed from a geometric diagram, they cannot all touch or use all of the diagram's lines. We shall therefore, for the sake of clarity, break our latest analytical diagram into three recognizable categories or stages. In figure 325, A, we find the basic diagram with two squares. vertical and diagonal crosses. In this diagram, we shall construct all those symbols whose lines coincide with those of the diagram without affecting or touching the diagram's other geometric shapes, the circle and acute angled triangle. In figure 325b, shows the diagram with the addition of the circle, and here we shall draw those symbols which require the use of the circle. In figure 325c, we have the full diagram showing the acute angled triangles. In practice, when the alphabet was being designed, the letters had likely been constructed within the complete diagram, i.e. figure 325c. In figure 326, we find those symbols we can call group A 9 in number: 10, 7, 5, 3, 22, 20, 18, 15, and 11. No discussion is necessary. All 9 fit so neatly and naturally into the geometric diagram that the result is almost breathtaking. It is perhaps worth emphasizing symbols 5 and 11. How else could these have been invented if not from precisely this type of geometric diagram? Theories have been aired in the past that the Phoenician script derived from symbols or well-known objects, such as cow, door, fishing rod, etc. The letters, according to the theorists, were an abstract image of the idea they expressed. But these theories do not account for several letters, e.g. number 5, which lacks all visible connection with common objects or shapes. There can be little basis to such theories since the Phoenicians had long been familiar with Egyptian hieroglyphs and Assyrian, Babylonian, Sumerian cuneiform, both forms of language having a wealth of expression. It is ridiculous to suggest that on this background and with knowledge of these languages, the Phoenicians went ahead and produced a system of writing that could express only 22 ideas, compared with the many, possibly thousands, of combinations in cuneiform. Such a 22-idea system would have been a retrogressive step, and could scarcely have formed the foundation for many of the written languages in use today, as indeed was the case with the Phoenician Moabite script. In figure 327, group B, we see the next 7 symbols, which make use of the circle's arc. They are 9, 17, 2, 16, 14, 13, and 19. Here again, the symbols fit so closely into the lines of the diagram that there can be no second thoughts as to their origin, ancient geometry. Numbers 14 and 13 are particularly striking. Admittedly, a circle with a stroke or a cross through it can be selected from the imagination as a phonetic symbol, but hardly so symbols 13 and 14. The next group is C, and in figure 328, we see the 3 symbols drawn from this diagram, which of course includes the acute angled triangle, symbols 1, 4, and 12. These also fit naturally into the diagram, and this accounts for 19 of the 22 Phoenician symbols. We are in no doubt as to the origin of these 19. This leaves us with 3 symbols, numbers 6, 8, and 21. For these, the diagram provides 1 or 2 alternatives, hence the inability to state categorically precisely where their origin lies. In figure 329, we find 2 possible formations for symbol number 6. The first alternative, A, is perhaps more likely to be correct than the second, and appears several times in this form on the Moabite stone. The second alternative follows only partly the lines of the diagram, but the resemblance is obvious. It is possible that the original sign was chosen as in A, but developed with use into B, or was written thus by the individual carver who chiseled out the Moabite inscription. We see symbol number 8 in figure 330, which illustrates yet another variation of the diagram, the lines of 4-part division having been introduced. We find this variation used in 1 or 2 other letters or symbols, and later, in our study of the Nordic runes, we shall find it was the principal geometric source of the ancient Scandinavian alphabet. Figure 330a shows the symbol with 1 slanted transverse stroke between 2 verticals, while B shows a horizontal shows a horizontal between the verticals. Symbol number 8, in its original form, actually has 2 slanted transverse strokes, and the diagram therefore fails somewhat to meet fully the shape of the original. The same 4-part dividing lines are also seen in figure 331, in which we see the final symbol in the alphabet. There are 3 possibilities, A, B, and C. A employs the same 2 vertical lines as used in the preceding illustration, but in fact the shape of the letter does not coincide exactly with the lines of the diagram, although geometrically the choice could be defended. In practice, on the Moabite stone, the symbol often appears as in B, i.e. shorter in height than the other symbols, but the same width. It is not unreasonable to surmise that the letter began as B but developed to A, on the grounds that it is unpractical to have one letter smaller than the others. C is another possibility, but admittedly not so convincing. Broadly speaking, we have been able to trace the origin of 19 out of 22 of the Phoenician letters without the slightest trouble. The remaining 3 give rise to doubt only to the extent that one has to choose between alternatives. No great degree of imagination is required to associate the symbols with the geometric diagram. Strictly statistically, approximately 86.5% of the alphabet fit the diagram perfectly, while there is a little doubt as to 13.5%, but it should furthermore be borne in mind that this was a handwritten script, not apparently drawn on carefully prepared geometric diagrams. Despite this factor, we have achieved a very high degree of success. The Phoenician alphabet and its variously formed letters were passed on to the Greeks. This is obvious when one compares the 2 scripts. Whether the legend is true that the alphabet arrived in Greece with a Phoenician prince by the name of Cadmus, who was searching for his kidnapped sister, I am afraid I cannot say. We are told that the sorrowing Cadmus stayed in Greece long enough to establish a township, and it was during this period that he had passed on the secrets of the alphabet. It may be the case that the alphabet arrived in Greece in this way, but at the same time we should recall that the Grecan temple engaged in friendly relations with sister temples throughout the cultural area of Central Europe and the Near East. Her priests would therefore no doubt have come in contact with the Phoenicians' new script. Greek priests were perhaps told not only of the Phoenician alphabet, but also of the background from which it was constructed. They then returned to Hellas and used their new knowledge and experience to produce their own rationalized alphabet. The early Grecan alphabet was strongly and obviously inspired by Phoenician script, but not to the degree that one could call it a takeover of the latter. But naturally, if the Greeks constructed the letters of their alphabet from the same source as the Phoenicians, it is only to be expected that points of recognition should creep in. In figure 332, we see a line reproduced from Arthur Mentz's book. In this, he declares to have been the oldest known form of the Greek alphabet. The list of letters is numbered 1 to 23, but numbers 15 and 18 have inexplicably been omitted. Moreover, in relation to the Phoenician script, the whole alphabet has been reversed, i.e. the Phoenician symbol number 22 is number 1 in the Greek alphabet, etc. When we compare the 2 alphabets geometrically, we find that only 3 letters are identical in each, numbers 9, 16, and 19. These contain the circle, a vertical stroke, and or the vertical cross. Many of the other letters are inverted. This is explained by the fact that the Phoenician alphabet was written from right to left, the Greek from left to right. In taking as their inscription the letters of the Phoenicians, the Greeks may not have had access to the original diagram. They may have fitted the Phoenician symbols into a related though slightly differing diagram, or they may have used the same diagram but selected different lines from within it. Only the symbols that contained the circles was there neither doubt nor opportunity for alteration. The following geometric analysis of the ancient Greek alphabet will be conducted in the same way as our examination of the Phoenician alphabet. The letters will be split into groups. Group A will be placed in the diagram with the 2 squares and 2 crosses. figure 333a. Group B letters will include the use of the circle or parts of it from figure 333b. Group C will include the above plus the acute angled triangle horizontally and vertically in figure 333c. In addition to the above groups, the Greek alphabet also made use of another geometric variation for one or two letters. This was the triangulation of the two above-mentioned squares. This departure, or addition, was also used by the Phoenicians for their letters numbers 8 and 21. We shall term these letters group D, and we see the diagram in figure 333d. In group A, we have 8 letters numbered 7, 8, 11, 12, 22, 23, 6, and 13. See figure 334. The letters and their geometric birthplace are plainly and certainly linked. The two fit together perfectly. Note particularly numbers 6 and 12. In figure 335, we find the 5 letters that concern the circle, i.e. numbers 9, 19, 16, 10, and 17. The third group, C, is found in figure 336, which makes use of the acute angled triangle. These are letters 3, 4, and 1. From this diagram, the Phoenicians appeared to have employed both the vertical and the horizontal triangles, while here we see that the Greeks seemingly used only the vertical. Only letter number 1 is doubtful. There are 2 possibilities, the difference between them being the position or angle of the sloping stroke inside the letter. A follows the horizontal acute angled triangle, while B follows the diagonal cross in the main square. Both alternatives have equal claims to being the source of number 1. The next group is D, which as we saw is in reality a continuation of diagram 333a. Here we have 3 symbols, numbers 5, 14, and 21, seen in figure 337, and we observe how number 5 fits into the general diagram, except that the middle of the 3 small strokes requires further subdivision of the diagram. Number 14 shows a lean to the right, which is unusual when we examine the Old Greek alphabet as a whole. The other letters are erect. I believe the lean is the result of a poorly shaped script on the part of the writer, or of an idiosyncrasy which may have crept in either at a particular period or in a particular temple area. In figure 338, we see 2 samples of Greek lettering. 338b shows letter number 14 with the mentioned lean towards the right, an extract from an ancient political manifesto, while 338a illustrates number 14 as an erect letter N. This proves that both forms were in use. 2 alternative theories concerning their origin are shown in figure 337. In figure 339, we see 2 alternatives for the formation of the letter number 20, but none matches exactly the pictured symbol. One theory, A, follows the straight lines of the diagram, the other, B, follows the arc of the circle part of the way, but neither gives full explanation for the letter which we of course know today as P. It is highly probable that the letter underwent a slight alteration as the alphabet developed, finally ending as illustrated in Mentz's book. It is not only probable, it is certain that at one time the letter resembled the alternative shown in figure 339a, i.e. with a sharp angled loop instead of a rounded one. We see a sample of this in figure 340, which shows 2 inscriptions from the 6th century BC. The sharply angled P is obvious. The final letter in the list produced by Arthur Mentz is number 2. We find its explanatory background shown in figure 341. This letter closely resembles number 20 and also shares a link with number 17. It is not, however, really related to either of these since it follows neither the straight nor the rounded lines of the diagram. As with number 20, we should bear in mind the style in which the letter was reproduced. Perhaps this particular example was the work of an individualist. In figure 342, we see the inscription in marble dating from about 490 BC. Several places in this inscription we find the letter as illustrated in diagram 341. In effect, number 2 ought to belong to group A, as should number 20, since samples of inscriptions have proved that they were at some time or at some stage made up of straight lines. Writing gained a rapid rise in popularity in Greek, bound up no doubt with the fact that paper production in Egypt and China eventually reached the stage where it could cope with the most pressing temple demands. But development blossomed at such a rate that it became impossible to lay down hard and fast rules regarding the authorized formation of the individual letter symbols. They differed from temple to temple. This accounts for the remarkable fact that different areas of Greece had their own provincial adaptations. Dr. Wilhelm Lehrfeld, in his Handbuch der klassischen Altertumswissenschaft Griechische Epigraphik, Munich 1914, reproduces 93 different variations of the Old Greek alphabet, in which the letters correspond roughly, but only roughly. There is still sufficient difference for Dr. Lehrfeld and the Greeks to enumerate 93 individual local alphabets. It was not until printing was developed that the letters were given a standard appearance and order was introduced into the chaotic situation. It would be difficult to put a date on the invention of printing. We know that the German Johann Gutenberg invented in the early 15th century the system of movable type, which has dominated to the present day, although photographic processes have been gaining considerable ground over the past decade. Gutenberg's method was to cast molten metal from existing model types, thus cutting down the need for so many finely etched printing plates. We are aware, too, that the Italian brothers Johann and Wendelin de Spira set up a book printing house in Venice in 1464, and made use of the Gutenberg system. This was a tremendous boost to the art of book printing. As Italy was at this time a dominating nation in the world of commerce, with considerable traffic through the principal North Italian cities of Florence, Genoa, Milan, and Venice, the language of the Italians had become well known and distributed throughout Europe. Italian script was of the so-called Latin variety, and this therefore gained a position of power in Europe. But Latin lettering was not invented by the Romans and native Italians. No doubt with their stylishness, the Italians improved the looks of the type and were masters in cutting typefaces, but the actual formation and structure were a legacy from the Etruscan inhabitants of west-central Italy, who in turn obtained them from the Greeks. And the inventor of italic type, the Italian printer Aldus Manutius, who set up business in Venice in 1490, was a staunch Hellenist. With the assistance of Greek advisors and compositors hired to work in his Italian print shop, Manutius had ancient Greek works reprinted in Latin. They included writings of Aristotle, Aristophanes, Sophocles, Herodotus, Plutarch, etc. The point we should note here, in addition to the fact that Greece was ahead of Italy in this field, is that Greece was so advanced that her Italian neighbor actually had to borrow typesetters to work in a Venetian printing house. This infers that Greece had an advanced process of printing even at that date and earlier, which corresponded in some way to the European system. Printing, moreover, must have been an ancient, well-established trade in Greece, for she would not otherwise have been able to afford to export her printing workers. Printing processes have been widespread all over the world for thousands of years. For example, in her look into the interior of Tibet, Parmi les mystiques et les magiciens du Tibet, Alexandra David Neal reports how the isolated Tibetans have operated their own printing system longer than history records, and the system is still in use, or, at any rate, exists side by side with more modern processes. Mrs. David Neal describes a visit to the largest printing house in Tibet, situated in the town of Nha Thang, and she watched printing employees at work with hand-carved wooden plates, one for each page. The printing house is owned by the temple and the work done by teams of specialist monks. The wooden surfaces are coated with ink, a suitable sheet of paper placed on the plate, and an impression taken. The carved plates are passed first to monks who do the inking, then to others who take the proofs, and finally to the librarian. This was perhaps one of the most fascinating parts of Mrs. David Neal's story. The plates are then stored in a gigantic building, housing row upon row of shelves, all piled high with old printing plates. There is presumably a history of several thousand years in that library. This would indicate that the temple in Tibet operated a printing press long before European and Greek brethren, for reproduction of sacred literature. It is impossible to calculate or discover how long written script existed in Greece before the advent of printing. The two presumably ran side by side until printing took over completely. But to set up a printing technique demands that a stand be taken on the formation of lettering. The printer must decide how the symbols are to appear in print and must select his ideal. In figure 343, we see Arthur Mentz's idea of the perfect script as he thinks it existed originally. There are few changes between this script and that which we find around 500 BC. In figure 344 is an inscription from about 398 BC, in which we find agreement with the ideal deduced by Mentz. There is, however, one variation. Arthur Mentz shows letter number 7, the one we recognize as H, with a slight lean to the right. The stone inscription, on the other hand, shows the letter perfectly vertical. The following analysis will therefore regard the letter as vertical. We have a line this time of 24 symbols, an increase of 2. As we did earlier, we divide the alphabet into groups. Here, however, we combine two groups, A and C. Thus, we shall find that the main groups of letters will be found in the diagram containing two squares, vertical and diagonal crosses, and the acute angled triangle. The completed diagram containing the circle is seen in figure 345. In figure 346, group A, we see the 15 letters of the first group, i.e. numbers 1, 3, 4, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 16, 19, 20, 22, and 23. All 15 follow closely the lines of the diagram and require no comment, except to remind the reader of the decided lean of number 7. The next group, B, is seen in figure 347, where we discover that the principal geometric shape required is the circle. The letters are number 15, 8, 5, and 18. Again, not the least doubt as to the letter's origin. They fit perfectly into the diagram. We have succeeded in tracing 19 out of the 24, and all fit exactly. Letter number 17, the P, now appears on the scene with an attractively curved head instead of the sharp angle we saw earlier. We see 3 possible alternatives in figure 348, and recall that A was supposed as the most probable shape. It is much the same with letter number 2, the B, 2 possible varieties of which we see in figure 349. The basic symbol was probably that seen in A, with the usage developed later into the more recognizable B in diagram B. Letter number 21, however, is one we have not met before. We see its most likely source of construction in figure 350, which would mean that it is a completely new arrival on the scene. It is not impossible, however, that it evolved out of the letter 19 in figure 335. Number 24, like the P and B, has advanced somewhat from its original geometric structure. We see the 2 stages in figure 351. Finally, we see letter number 12, the M, in figure 352, and note that it is the same as in figure 337. The reason for departure from the strict lines of the diagram in the case of 1 or 2 of the letters may have been that the later versions were regarded more beautiful in form. In any event, it involves only a minimum number of letters. The strong resemblance borne by all three alphabets in their obvious geometric background can lead only to the conclusion that this diagram was in fact the origin of Phoenician and Greek lettering. Most letters fit exactly, and one or two here and there deviate minutely from the diagram's lines. We next find the diagram in use in ancient Rome, where its lines were used to construct Latin numerals. The system introduced by the Romans was simple and logical. They started with a couple of symbols, I being 1, II being 2, III being 3. Since V is 5, the Romans represented 4 as follows. They placed 1 before, or I before the V to indicate subtraction. Thus, IV equaled 5 minus 1, or 4. In the same way, for the numeral 6, they placed I after V to indicate addition. Thus, VI equals 5 plus 1, being 6, VII being 7, and VIII being 8. So far, so good. For the numeral 10, they selected the Greek letter X, and by the above system, IX equaled 10 minus 1, or 9. For 50, they made a symbol L, for 100, a symbol C, for 500, symbol D, and for 1000, symbol M. A stroke above a numeral indicated that it should be multiplied by 1000. Thus, IX, with a line over it, signified 9 times 1,000, or 9,000. Compared with the ancient civilizations of Persia, Babylon, Egypt, Greece, and others, the Roman Empire was an infant in cultural development. But in the eyes of many parts of Europe, perhaps on account of proximity, Rome was a pioneer state where inspiration was there for the picking. It is difficult to work out why the Romans chose this arrangement of symbols to represent their numerals. Perhaps they had their own numeric system before the influence of Greek spread to Italy. Roman priests were familiar with ancient geometry and chose to design their lettering along the same lines as the old established nations of the Near East had done. Their first need was a set of numerical symbols. 4 of the Roman symbols, I, X, C, and M, already existed in the Greek alphabet, whereas the remaining 3, V, L, and D, were newcomers and unknown to the Greeks. If two people, the groups of priests, were faced with exactly the same geometric diagram system and were intent on constructing a set of numeral from the lines of the diagram, it is highly probable that some of the symbols in each camp would be identical. True, the more symbols required, the more complicated the diagram would become, but the vertical and diagonal crosses are two obvious sources of inspiration. The Roman system of numerals possibly existed in its present form before they took over the alphabet from the Greeks. Had the Romans waited until the Greek alphabet arrived, they would have been able to select all 7 numerals from the new alphabet, which contained 24 letters. The evidence suggests that the Romans had developed their numerals before Greek and Etruscan influence arrived with the new system of lettering. Roman temples were acquaint with geometry. Mystery schools were constituted in southern Italy after Pythagoreans were banished from Greece. It is very probable that the Pythagorean refugees brought with them a version of Greek lettering and numbers, and equally possible that traveling priests from and to Italy introduced the geometric diagram in Rome from which Greek and Phoenician scripts had been developed. Whatever the precise order of events, Roman numerals and language were used throughout Italy and Europe for centuries, thanks to the lasting influence of Rome's empire-building legions and to religion. In many places and spheres, Roman numerals lived side by side with the incoming Arabic numerals for centuries. It was not until the 10th century AD that the latter finally broke through the barrier of established tradition into the general and popular usage. We see the Roman numerals in figure 353 where their origin in the geometric diagram is obvious. The persistence of Roman numerals is surprising. Even today, when Hindu-Arabic numerals dominate everywhere, the Latin I, etc., still survive in books, on clocks, etc. Roman numerals are used only to indicate complete numbers today. They are no longer employed for calculation purposes. They have long given way to the more rational Arabic symbols. Adding three relatively simple Roman numerals together is such a complicated process that one wonders whether the method can ever have been used successfully. When the Romans adopted the art of writing, whether from the Greeks or Etruscans, it was presumably as handwriting and not in printed form, and remained a system of handwriting until printed was introduced in northern Italy in the early 15th century. Although printing was late in arriving in Italy, it is feasible that a technique of printing had existed elsewhere along the Mediterranean coast, or in Europe, somewhat resembling the method we know today, with type on paper as opposed to impressions in clay or in other plastic materials. Such a technique would not necessarily be transferred from one country to another, nor need it be in wider use than handwriting. Only a few centuries back, around 1400, a printing technique was developed, but it by no means ousted handwriting. The latter was more prolific than printed matter for a long time afterwards, partly because it is not every thought, fact, or report that requires to be printed and reproduced in numbers. Only now, with the wide distribution of typewriters and all models of printing equipment, is handwriting begin to suffer. Think back 20, 30 years to the beautifully formed handwriting of those days. The Romans received a system of writing from outside sources about the year 500 BC, but the existence of a writing system does not necessarily mean that a nation's advancement takes place overnight. Just how slowly Europe developed in this respect was emphasized by Keith Gordon Irvine in his book The Romance of Writing. In the year 1200 AD, he wrote, even the richest monasteries in Western Europe had libraries of less than 150 books, many of which could more aptly be termed booklets. And 200 years later, the position had scarcely altered. This, said Irvine, was due not so much to the fact that people had no desire to write, nor that they lacked important or interesting ideas. It was simply that they lacked sufficient parchment to write on. From the date the Romans acquired the art of writing to the time printing was really well and truly established is nearly 2,000 years. It is significant to observe that development did not get fully underway until Rome, or Italy, became a seafaring nation and able to acquire as much parchment and paper as she desired. Previously, the nations surrounding Egypt had requisitioned all available supplies of writing materials, and very little had reached the northern shores of the Mediterranean. Development proceeded, and the symbols the Romans adopted from the Etruscans and Greeks were amended to suit Latin taste. New symbols were added to account for variations in pronunciation, and the Latinized alphabet as we know it today gradually took shape. This alphabet, too, fitted into the geometric background of the Greek and Phoenician symbols. The Roman temple certainly was familiar with ancient geometric principles and acquainted with the origin of the symbols it had adopted. Let us examine the Latin alphabet as we know it in Europe today. In figure 354, we have 12 symbols: E, F, H, L, M, T, X, Y, Z, I, and K. For these, the Romans applied only the 2 squares and 2 crosses of the diagram. There is no doubt about the origin of these 12. In figure 355, we find 8 letters which make use of the circle within the basic square: C, D, G, J, O, Q, U, and the Danish O with a strike through. Again, the diagram is followed faithfully. Figure 356 shows 4 symbols which make use of the acute angled triangle: A, V, W, and the Danish AE. This brings us to 24. The English alphabet has 26 letters, the Danish an extra 2. We shall now look at the remaining 4 letters, B, P, R, and S. In their case, there appears to have been either a degeneration or development of the original symbol, since the sharpened corners have been worn off with time. We see the development in figure 357 and can trace the change from angled shapes to rounded ones. In fact, therefore, only 4 out of the range of 26 or 28 Latin letters have undergone many alterations from the original symbol, an infinitely small degree of deterioration when one considers that the letters were mainly handwritten for a period of nearly 2,000 years. Latin lettering gradually spread throughout most of Europe, and, among other places, in Germany the symbols were subjected to a process of ornamentation with squiggles, banners, and other flourishes, which collectively has been associated with Central Europe. Such Gothic script came very close to being unrecognizable except by trained experts, and was in danger of being labeled the result of imagination with no basis whatever in any established system. But this flowery script, too, had a limited lifetime. The mass of people moved back to the simplicity of the original symbols. On its slow journey across Europe, Latin script encountered another form of writing that resembled the written language of the Romans to a certain degree, without being a copy in any way. This script was the runic alphabet of Northern Europe, practiced by the inhabitants of the Teutonic Scandinavian region. The runic alphabet, or runes as the individual characters are called, flourished in Scandinavia and parts of Scotland and Germany about 2,000 years ago. It gradually gave way to Roman lettering and the spread of Christian writing, but was still being used occasionally, e.g. isolated parts of Sweden, as late as the 18th century. The two alphabets, Roman and runic, had certain points in common. Individual symbols represented sounds which could be placed together to make words. The number of letters was similar, 26 Roman, 24 runic, etc. But the appearance and order of phonetic values differed. Whereas the Roman alphabet began with the sounds and symbols A, B, C, the runic alphabet started with symbols representing the sounds F, U, and TH, or th. The phonetic value of this latter symbol does not exist in the Latinized alphabet. Although entirely gone elsewhere, the sign thurs still exists in the Icelandic language. It lives on in harmony with Roman lettering, but cannot be dispensed with since there is no Roman symbol to cover exactly the sound in question. In figure 358, we see the complete runic alphabet with the approximate Roman equivalent. The sample has been photographed from Norges Indskriftor med de aldre runor by Sophus Bugge, B-U-G-G-E, Christiana, 1905 through 1913, a historical account of runes, their possible origin and interpretation. Bugge devoted an immense amount of time and study to the research of runic history, and consequently I regard his lettering as the most correct in this field. In addition to the main area of use in the runic alphabet, Bugge states that runes have also been discovered in Poland and deep into the Rhine and Danube valleys, as well as on Iceland. The most probable center of runic origin was Scandinavia. Bugge's theory assumes that runes originated around 600 to 800 AD with an alphabet of 24 characters. About 100 years later, another version of runes developed with 16 characters based on the existing alphabet. We see the second alphabet in figure 359. Thus, we find that a system of writing originated or existed in Northern Europe as a series of phonetic symbols, i.e. the same type of system employed by the late Greeks and early Romans. The runes apparently came into being around 1300 years later than the period during which the Greeks received their alphabet from the Phoenicians. Call to mind the development that preceded the birth of an alphabet in the cultural civilizations of the Near East and Mediterranean. There were the 600 hieroglyphs of the Egyptians. Then came the approximately 350 characters of the cuneiform language, later reduced by the Persians to 100. Along came the Phoenician traders to further rationalize writing to a system of 22 symbols with clear-cut phonetic meaning. These were passed on to the Greeks, who gave the message to the Etruscans, who in turn passed the material to the Romans. The latter are honored by the world as inventors of Roman letters, when in fact it took thousands of years of evolution, development, experience, and experiment to arrive at the Latin script. And then it is suggested that a new alphabet was invented in the north with no apparent background, no proof of prior development, out of thin air. Was this possible? The Nordic people of those early days were warriors. They were an up-and-coming civilization. Their reputation was not based on philosophy. They were a material, tangible people, and surviving material portrays them to be more a nation of barbarous warmongers than meditating wise men. Although there had naturally been a sprinkling of philosophers among them, they were ruled by brute strength and savagery. How could people of this caliber, who loved the whistle of the sword and more dearly than the scratch of a pen, how could they create a perfect alphabet without outside help, without assistance from some party familiar with the business of writing? How could these warriors, few of whom could read or write, warriors without writing materials, create a system of writing which in its development and sophistication was equal to the experience of much more ancient civilizations? It is scarcely possible to believe that they did. A system of writing cannot be drummed up out of the blue. It takes and needs time to develop. I believe there is only one explanation to the existence of the runic alphabet in Northern Europe. It was learned from an outside source who already possessed a system of writing. The Scandinavians either adopted a complete system or developed a system that had already been started. How then, if the runic alphabet was adapted from or based on an existing system, can it differ so completely in appearance from other systems that no link can be traced? So completely that the world has attributed runes solely to the Scandinavians? I think the explanation may be something on these lines. We have seen throughout the whole development of planning, building, art, language, etc., that the temple was the center of all knowledge. We saw several alphabets evolve on this basis, and how temple leaders took the initiative in most civilizations. But we also recall the strict sense of secrecy that surrounded everything developed by the temple and shared by its initiates. Let us imagine for a moment that one or more temple brethren from a part of the world where writing was already established arrived in the north, i.e. Northern Europe, presumably Scandinavia. He may either have come on his own free will or have been captured during a Scandinavian campaign and dragged off to the wilds of the north. He discovered that, apart from lacking manners, his hosts had no knowledge of writing. He had no means of written communication. He had a strong desire to share his knowledge in this direction. At this point, the theory has two possible developments. The Teutonic language, perhaps, gave him no chance to transfer directly the phonetic symbols of his native tongue. The Nordic coarseness was guttural in pronunciation, much harder than his own language. Or perhaps he had to take into account the oath of secrecy sworn at his temple initiation. He may have been able to adapt his own language's symbols to the tongue of his hosts, but to instruct others in the makeup of the symbols would have required to reveal the secret diagram in order to illustrate how the symbols could be remembered. Since he had learned the use of the diagram in the temple and at the same time swore never to reveal its secrets to outsiders, he could not explain the original symbol to his new pupils. Thus, it may be a combination of these possibilities that caused him to produce a complete set of new symbols. He would in this way be able to construct new symbols to suit the Teutonic tongue, and at the same time to be able to comply with his oath of secrecy, for he would draw a different symbol from that used in his homeland. If this theory is correct, then we should discover that the runic alphabet was constructed according to a geometric diagram, as were the earlier languages examined. And this apparently was the case. In figure 360, we see two geometric diagrams. A is the one on which the Phoenician, Greek, and Roman alphabets selected individual letters, and which is identifiable as symbol E, see Chapter 5. B is identified as the symbol G. This diagram was also used for one or two Phoenician and Greek symbols. We see in figure 361 the 24 symbols of the runic alphabet placed in the ancient geometric diagram from which they originated. The symbols are the same as those illustrated in figure 358. We observe, as previously, an astounding similarity between the lines of the diagram and the shape of the individual symbols. At the same time, we ought to bear in mind that the symbols are a reconstruction produced by Sophus Bug, yet no compensation is required in order to fit the symbols into the figure. We see that rune number 3 is not exactly the same as the original geometric shape, being rounded instead of angled. This may be because it was amended slightly to distinguish it from rune number 8, which resembles it and which still retains the angled pennant. Number 18 has also been rounded off, so has number 5. But these variations do not disturb the general picture and are in fact natural developments. Many of the runes have remarkable shapes, which strongly supports the theory that this diagram was the basis of their formation. Otherwise, their strange shapes would never have fitted the geometric pattern, and was used by Eastern civilizations to construct phonetic symbols, to allow them to write. It was thus more than probable that the people of Northern Europe who are responsible for the runic alphabet received their inspiration from outside. The later version of the alphabet, with 16 symbols, is seen analyzed in figure 362. These also fit the lines of the diagram. The latter alphabet of 16 characters is 8 fewer than the preceding, but the 16 are not identical with the earlier set of symbols. There are both variations on the old letters and new symbols altogether, but adaptations and newcomers all meet the requirements of the diagram. This was the same development encountered in Greece, where nearly 100 local alphabets evolved from just such variations, amendments, and local individualism. Let us compare the two runic alphabets. We shall term the first 24-letter version A and the later version B. We see that runes 1, 2, and 3 in both A and B are identical. A4 and B4 are almost identical, except that the upper stroke in the latter has been lowered slightly. Number 5 in both alphabets are the same. Symbols A6 and B6 bear no resemblance to each other. The latter is a new letter, but resembles number 1. A7 has a distinct relationship to B7, yet the difference is sufficient to allow us to record a new letter. We omit A8 and A9 since these do not exist in B, and note A10 and B8 are identical. A11 and B9 are identical, while A12 and 13 have been dropped from B. A14 and B13 are the same, which should indicate that the phonetic value has altered from P to B. B10 and B11 are also new symbols, not found in A. A15 and B14 are the same, but here again there has been a change of phonetic value. A16 has been dropped from the later alphabet. A17 and B12 are identical. A18, A19, and A20 are not to be found in B, and A21 and B15 are identical. A22, A23, and A24 are not included in B, and B16 is a new symbol. Thus, of the 16 symbols in the new alphabet, only 10 are the same as the old symbols, while the remaining 6 have varying degrees of resemblance to the old alphabet. This makes a whole of 30 runic symbols, all of which were apparently constructed on the basis of the geometric diagram. It is difficult to stipulate why the number of letters should be reduced from 24 to 16. Perhaps 24 symbols were too many for the warring Vikings. They needed a simpler version. In rearranging the alphabet, the cultural leaders discovered that the certain sounds were poorly represented in writing. Hence, a reassessment of existing symbols, a general tidying up, and the introduction of 6 new characters for the sounds that were missing. It is not the purpose of this book to discover why the Vikings should alter their written language all of a sudden. We are intent here purely upon illustrating that in company with other early scripts, the runic alphabet was based on a solid philosophical foundation, the diagrams of ancient geometry. It may be a coincidence that the new alphabet contained 16 symbols, and the diagram contained 16 small squares. On the other hand, it may not. We have several fine examples of runes in the next few illustrations. Figure 363 shows the great gelling stone, dating from about 940 AD. In figure 364, we find the Sondervissing stone, discovered in the Aarhus district of Jutland. Both these illustrations were borrowed from Ludwig F.A. Wimmer's book, De Dansk Rund Mindsmarker, or Maker, 1895. The two remaining illustrations were also taken from the same book, but stem not from Denmark, but from Sweden and Norway, respectively. Figure 365 is a picture of the Awesome Stone from Skåne in northern Sweden, and it illustrates how in this case the text should be read from the top downwards, then continuing from the bottom upwards, precisely as a farmer plows his fields. The Tune stone in figure 366 is from the Smålands district of Norway. The runic alphabet did not enjoy the same growth or conditions for growth as the script of the Romans. It was placed in the possession of a people who were not sufficiently developed to practice and hone this, one of the culture's finest tools, nor were the Scandinavians concerned with examining the possibilities of writing. They were more often on the warpath than not, and trade and commerce did not attract them. If they fancied a herd of cattle, a group of blonde damsels, not to forget an extensive area of England, they did not trade, they took. The sword, in their case, was superior to the pen. Nevertheless, runes survived long enough to spread over a wide area. Samples have been found in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and also, as mentioned earlier, Germany and North Britain. But although samples have come to light throughout this area, their number has been few, less than a couple of hundred. The gods of the marauding Vikings were principally Odin and Thor, and the warriors supported a priesthood to look after the interests of and appease the deities. The priests had of course assembled, partly through their own labor and experiment, partly from inheritance, a certain ability and knowledge over and above the art of daily living. They were familiar with calendar observations, a primitive system of mathematics, and other similar philosophic accomplishments. It was not necessarily from the mysterious lands of southern climes that the Nordic priests learned and practiced the principle of secrecy. The concealment to one's advantage of knowledge of this type is just as much an instinct as a conscious ability. There were no mystery religious groups in the north resembling those of the ancient cultural nations of the Near and Far East, apart perhaps from the priesthood. There was no organization or society with centuries of tradition behind it, to compare with, for example, the Egyptian or Babylonian temples. In relation to the old established nations of the South and East, the north of Europe was culturally at a decidedly primitive stage, little above the barbarian. A select handful in the north were aware that southern colleagues were part of a development which was centuries ahead of northern Europe. When runes were first brought into being, possibly in the manner described earlier in the chapter, few in Scandinavia were familiar with the material for which the alphabet was intended, papyrus or parchment. It is thus probable that the script was written mainly in wood, carved with a knife edge, or chipped into stone. It is equally probable that a minority of priests wrote the alphabet on the materials for which it was created. But if this was indeed the case, the moist climate of the north has since destroyed all traces of paper, parchment, or papyrus from that era. At any rate, no runes have been discovered in this form. Although the presentation of the runic alphabet to the warring Vikings was like tossing pearls before a herd of swine. Some might say pigs. The gift of writing to the Romans was not accepted in the same way. The Romans fully appreciated the value and use of the cultural tool. The empire had previously developed a system of numbers and had built up a comprehensive trade with nations outside and inside the empire area. Hence the widespread use of the Latin language in script, more than was the case for any language earlier in history. From whom did the Romans get their script? There are a number of possible alternatives, two being the most likely. Either the inspiration came direct from Greece, or, which I believe to be more probable, the Latin script was based on the rational system of writing operated in northern Italy by the Etruscans. Who were the Etruscans? Again, theories have been put forward by the score, without any one proving conclusive. At the time when the Latin alphabet arose, the Etruscans were apparently settled in Italy. They had arrived from the outside and conquered large parts of the country between Florence and Rome. There is general agreement that the natives of the area of Italy, known at that time as Etruria, were seafaring people who had arrived on the shores of Italy by boat. The most popular and commonly held theory is that they stemmed originally from Asia Minor, but their stepping off point cannot be traced, nor can the reason for their emigration. Why should an apparently advanced people uproot and sail bag and baggage to Italy? The question is so far unanswered. They mastered both warfare and peace. As well as being a nation of conquerors, they were adept at the production of items of art and writing. The script which the Etruscans introduced to Italy was neither Phoenician nor Greek, but a collection of 24 symbols, unmistakably of the same family as the other two languages. The family link derived from the fact that the individual letters were planned and executed from the same geometric symbol employed by the Greeks and Phoenicians. We see the Etruscan alphabet in figure 367, and one notices immediately the vague likeness to, for example, Old Greek. But if the individual letters are examined closely, it is discovered that none of those in the Etruscan alphabet is in fact identical to any in the other Greek or Phoenician alphabets. The geometric diagram used by the Etruscan in the construction of their alphabet was the square, the vertical and diagonal crosses, the inner circle, and the 4x4 lines of division. The Etruscans omitted the acute angled triangle from their diagram, a factor also dropped by the planners of runes. We see the geometric symbol in figure 368, and in figure 369 we find the complete alphabet set in its geometric background. I thought it unnecessary here to group the letters according to structure. As in the case of the alphabets examined earlier, the individual letters have been numbered for identification purposes, and only 2 of the 24 have required an addition to the diagram, numbers 18 and 23. For these, we have entered the circle's half-size version as the basic form. Apart from these 2, however, the other symbols follow unswervingly the lines of the standard diagram. Thus, we see that in the same way as the Phoenicians and Greeks, the Etruscan cultural and/or religious leaders produced a script containing 24 symbols, which differed from other existing scripts. In the opinion of the author, this illustrates that the Etruscan people were an independent group, uninfluenced by the Greek cultural life that affected the affairs of so many other contemporary civilizations. They were in a position to enjoy the same traditional knowledge as Greece and to drink at the same cultural spring, but in choice of alphabet had selected their own form. Apart from the alphabets and cultures examined in this chapter, a number of other civilizations had a crucial effect on the written languages and culture of the present day. They were the giants, the supreme powers, the sixes and the sevens, the NATOs of the ancient world. But it would be much too lengthy and epic for this book to study each in turn. We have space and time only for a representative cross-section. But I think I have shown the constructive path taken by the alphabets most used by nations of the Western world, the Latin script. In the course of my research, I have naturally subjected other written languages to the ancient geometric test, and I may report that the great majority of them fit the picture when one is able to track down a sufficiently old version of the script. My theory is therefore that the temple, in the respective civilizations, was the kiln in which alphabets and written languages originally formed, developed, and hardened. It was from the temple that the new scripts emerged and additions were made to extant alphabets. The temple saw to it that the script was kept up to standard and that the letters closely resembled their geometric ghosts. And the local temples decided whether the people should write and read from left to right or vice versa, or in the case of the runes, a combination of both directions. The theory fits, I think, historical events as they have been recorded. On the subject, David Dieringer wrote in his book Writing that it was true both of the Slav alphabet and the Arabic alphabet that they followed religion. Russians, White Russians, Ukrainians, Bulgars, and Serbs accepted the Cyrillic alphabet together with the Greek Orthodox Church. The Roman Catholic religion brought the use of the Roman alphabet to the Slovenes, Croats, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Wends, and Lusatians. Thus we find Dieringer's information matching my theory that the appearance of a complete alphabet hand in hand with religion is not something that happens gradually. It is introduced as a finished product which tolerates no personal amendment if it is to survive.